I don't usually talk about this, but what happened last month, it still haunts me. So I was in Portsmouth, staying with a cousin, while handling some family paperwork. One evening after dinner and drinks, I left their flat to catch the last tram from a quiet part of town. The stop was mostly empty, except for one woman sitting on the far bench beneath a flickering street lamp. At first, I didn't think much of her. She looked like she could have been anyone, really. Early 30s maybe, dressed in a long grey coat and matching scarf, even though the air was warm. Her head was down though, and she seemed to be staring at her hands or maybe something on her lap. I took out my phone and scrolled for a bit. 10 minutes passed, no tram. When I looked back up again, she was still in the exact same position. And that was the first thing that really bothered me, just how perfectly still she was. Not scrolling her phone, not shifting in her seat, not even blinking from what I could tell. Just sort of perfectly still. And then she slowly turned her head. Her eyes found mine instantly, like she knew that I'd been watching. And her face was wrong. I cannot explain it better than that, really, but not disfigured, not ugly, but just like off. Her skin was ash pale and smooth in a way that looked unnatural, like a porcelain doll almost. Her eyes were glassy, grey and unblinking. She smiled, a twitchy, joyless grin that didn't touch the rest of her face. She didn't say anything, and she just sort of stared at me. I shifted uncomfortably and looked away, pretending to check the tram schedule on my phone. When I looked back, she was now closer. She had moved from the far bench to the middle of the station, but I hadn't heard her walk at all. I hadn't heard anything, and I didn't even see her move. She was still staring, still smiling, but now also gently rocking back and forth. Then I realized that she was also humming, a lone tuneless murmur, just barely audible under the sound of distant traffic. I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just kept humming. My stomach turned when she didn't answer. Something primal inside of me was screaming that this was all wrong, that I needed to leave, now. But I hesitated. I guess I didn't want to be rude. Maybe she was sick or high or just having a mental episode or something. But then she whispered something, so softly that I couldn't make it out. I stepped back, and that was when she moved. Suddenly, and with jarring speed, she rushed towards me, her hands reaching out with fingers that were far too long. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted down the sidewalk, heart in my throat, her footsteps, barefoot and rapid, slapping the pavement behind me. I rounded the corner, ducked behind a metal dumpster, and held my breath. Silence. But then I heard the humming, closer than before. I held still, barely daring to breathe. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. And when I peeked out, she was gone. Well, I ran the rest of the way back to the main road and flagged down a passing taxi. The driver could tell that I was spooked and asked me if I was okay. I told him that I was okay, but he said that I looked like I had seen a ghost. And honestly, looking back, maybe I had. Well, I told my cousin the next morning, and they said that years ago apparently a woman had been killed near the same tram stop, a Jane Doe. No ID, and the only thing that she had on her was allegedly a grey coat and a scarf. They buried her nearby, and the grave, it's still unmarked. When I was about 13, I spent a lot of my weekends with my best friend Mark, who lived just a few miles away in a small rural town nearby. Our favorite pastime was riding dirt bikes through the open fields and then venturing into the woods that bordered the far side of a large soybean field. That fall, after an early snow had dusted the ground with about 4 inches, we set out as usual. The cold air bit through our jackets, and the crisp white snow made everything feel quieter somehow, like the world had been muted. After an afternoon of riding, we parked our bikes near the edge of the woods like we always did, and decided to explore deeper than we ever had before. These woods were dense and tangled, filled with old rotting trees and patches where nothing grew except moss and fallen leaves. We had seen a few rusted relics here and there over the years, abandoned tools, a dilapidated old truck, half swallowed by the forest, but nothing too unusual. And well, we planned to build a small shelter near a cluster of fallen logs and branches that we'd found the week before. I personally carried a small hatchet in my backpack for cutting smaller branches, and Mark had some rope with him. I wandered off a little ways on my own to find some more materials, leaving Mark to start clearing a bit of a spot. And that was when I stumbled upon something that made my stomach twist. About 30 yards away, half buried in the snow and the leaves, was the remains of an animal, a deer from the looks of it. But it wasn't just dead. The carcass was torn apart in a way that genuinely was horrific. Deep, jagged marks ran along its side, claw marks I was sure, and its fur was pulled back in strips. The first thought was a wild animal attack, but the marks were too precise, too clean. Nothing I knew of in these woods, too, would leave scratches like that without dragging the rest of the carcass away. It was honestly as if something had just arrived, shredded it, and left it without finishing the meal. I called Mark over, and we both stared silently at this thing. Neither of us said much, but the air between us thickened. Eventually, though, we left the carcass alone, and we went back to building our shelter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone after that. A few minutes later, I was tying 2 branches together when I caught movement. It was in my peripheral vision, but I was sure of it. At first, I thought it was just the way that the tree swayed, but then I saw it clearly. A dark figure standing just beyond the trees about 50 yards away. It wasn't a person exactly, too. It was tall, but its outline was sort of oddly blurred, like a heat haze or a shadow that didn't belong. The edges weren't sharp, and it seemed to ripple against the background like it was slightly out of sync. I shouted, "Hey, who's there?" But the figure didn't move or respond. Instead, it seemed to sort of dissolve almost behind a thick oak. Mark turned around, and as he laughed off what I had seen, I suddenly noticed the same figure standing just behind his shoulder, closer this time, maybe only 10 yards away. I couldn't help it. I yelled run and took off across the woods toward the open field, heart pounding. I heard Mark behind me at first, footsteps thudding hard in the snow, but then they faded, and when I looked back, he had disappeared down another path. Panic pushed me forward until I reached a wide ditch filled with frozen water. Without thinking, I leapt across it, a jump I later realized must have been more than 10 feet almost. Somehow I cleared it though, and I kept running. When I finally made it to the field's edge, Mark was there, hunched over and gasping for breath. "You saw it, right?" I asked, still shaking. He nodded, too scared to say any more. We mounted our bikes and we didn't say a word all the way back to his house. We were so focused on desperately trying to get out of there. Later, we did ask his grandmother about the woods, and she told us about an old tragedy decades ago where a man apparently lost his life in the forest who was never found, and strange things seen by hunters and hikers ever since then. She also warned us to stay out of those woods after dark, saying that some things just aren't meant to be disturbed. We never did go back after that day, nighttime or daytime. Even now, 2 years later, I still get that sinking feeling whenever I'm near thick woods. I don't know what it was that we saw that afternoon, if it was just a trick of the light, an animal, or something else entirely. But I know one thing. Some places hold on to secrets, and sometimes those secrets, they watch back. I used to live near a redwood forest that goes for miles in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There's a land trust that we locals knew about that had amazing trails and incredible views. It's a large trust with no clearly defined boundaries too. If you were to get lost, you could end up hiking to the next county. While Santa Cruz County had a lot of homeless folks and addicts as well, we didn't usually run into anyone sketchy in this part of the county, as it was not in a populated area by any means. There weren't many homes along the winding road through the redwoods to get to the land trust. Only one home shared the long driveway to the parking area. Not many people knew about this secret spot, only the locals really knew about it too. Anyway, a couple of years ago, my son was visiting from college. We had planned to go to this land trust together. He always wanted to go to this spot when I tried to get him to do something with me. It's one of the places that feels like home to him, I guess. Except, my son was a major procrastinator who likes to waste most of his day playing guitar or doing stuff on the internet, like so many of his generation. It always took some cajoling to get him motivated and moving. For this reason, too, we usually wouldn't start heading out of this land trust until like late afternoon, which caused us to have to hike back during sunset, just as it's getting dark, despite the fact that there was a very clear sign next to the open gate to the parking area that said park closes at sunset. Well, one time we actually stayed about 10 minutes past sunset, when the residual daylight was starting to fade, and were surprised by some old folks who had managed the land trust for years. They were waiting for us to close and lock the gate to the parking area, and sort of chastised us a bit for being late. Thank the Lord that they didn't lock my car in for the night. Unfortunately, though, we did not learn our lesson. The last time that this whole scenario played out was especially late, about an hour before sunset for an hour-long hike after a 10-minute drive. The hike up to the lookout was perfectly fine and beautiful, as usual. We saw an amazing sunset from the lookout too. We were mesmerized by the layers of the treetops as the sun set over the ocean. We didn't want to leave, and so we stayed too long. Since we had just watched the sunset, we realized we now only had about 15 to 20 minutes of residual daylight on a 30-minute hike. I just hoped that the land trust gatekeepers were running late that day. Part of that hike has a steep trail too, the kind that isn't too bad getting up, but you feel like you might lose your footing and fall going down it. The trail, it was particularly difficult for me now that I was getting older. It was also getting hard for me to see in the dark at this stage. We debated if we should take that trail at all, but it was the shortest route, so we headed in that direction. There were no other hikers left at this point. The sound of our footsteps and our voices were the only thing that we could hear in the forest. I was worrying about my car getting locked into the parking lot. We still had a ways to go in this dark, empty redwood forest. Redwood trees are beautiful during the day, but they are massively tall and block out even more light, their silhouettes now even more intimidating as the sun is fading. The situation was scary as it was, but it was about to become truly terrifying. Of course, by the time that we had made it to this steep section of the hike, it got completely dark, within about 15 minutes of the hike left to go. I was stressed trying to navigate the trail and trying hard not to fall down it. I think I must have just purposely sort of slid down the last few feet, in fact. At this point, I was getting disoriented. I would not have been able to find our way back to the car alone, if I'm being completely honest. I was hoping my son knew which trails that we still needed to take and which way to turn, and put all my faith in him. I was pretty worried that we'd get lost, so I started complaining. But we shouldn't have left so late. It's too dangerous to hike in the dark. We could get injured. I'm too old for this. I continued with, "It's not safe to hike in the wilderness at night. You can't see what's in the forest. This is the last time that we're ever doing this. We can't get here at a reasonable time. I'm not going next time." My typical carefree son just stayed quiet, listening. He looked both worried and determined, though, fully bearing the entire responsibility of our mishap, I guess, knowing that he was the one who was going to have to lead us out. While our predicament was not entirely his fault, my warnings were about to be proven right, unfortunately. Just as we were coming off of that steep trail, that was when we heard a gunshot. We look at each other like, what the heck? Then we heard another. A single gunshot continued for about every 20 to 30 seconds. And it sounded way too close for comfort. Now, it was just us in the forest and whoever was shooting that gun, allegedly. We couldn't really tell exactly where the gunshots were coming from, as the trails had many twists and turns. I knew that we were getting closer to the few houses in the area, though, and my brain started making up all sorts of perfectly safe and reasonable reasons that we were hearing gunshots, on a trail in the dark no less. This was not the first time that I'd heard gunshots in the Santa Cruz Mountains. A handful of meth addicts living in the mountains get high or drunk and decide to shoot their guns for whatever reason, usually to scare and just troll the neighbors a bit, or just because they can, but you could call the sheriff, but whoever was doing it would just stop and deny that they were, if the sheriff even responded to the call at all, that is. I'm not sure if it's illegal to shoot your own gun in your own yard at night like a creep, but it does occasionally happen in these mountains. Anyway, as the shots continued, our stress levels got much higher and started walking much faster. When we got to the last trail that led to the parking area, it became obvious that the gunshots were coming from that area where our car was parked. We didn't even consider calling the sheriff in this unincorporated area because we didn't want our voices to be heard. I mean, if we began to be directly shot at, we would take cover and call 911, I guess. At that point, we just wanted to get out of there, so we continued to hike in silence. I hated seeing the worried look on my son's face, and I wished that I could tell him that it was going to be alright, but honestly, I didn't know if we were going to be. The very last section of the hike was about a 300-foot long gravel road that made a very loud crunching sound as we walked on it. I always worry about twisting my ankle on these rocks in daylight, but now that we had no light, whoever was shooting that gun could now hear us coming for sure. And that was when the gunshots stopped. We also stopped, looked at each other, and waited. When we didn't hear any more gunshots for a while, we continued on, prepared to take cover or run if we were shot at. The only thing that we had going for us now was the cover of the forest and the dark, I guess. When we finally got to the parking area, we could see our car sitting there with no other cars or people around it, despite clearly hearing gunshots from this area just moments before. I looked for any sign of those angry old land trust people, but I saw no one. We walked quickly, got into my car, and we drove out of there as quickly as we could. There was a car parked in the pullout just past the gate, and we drove past it as fast as we could drive down a small windy mountain drive at night. And look, I don't know who was shooting that gun, but I'm certain of three things. Those gunshots, they were for us. Somebody closed and locked that gate after we left, and we both learned our lesson about hiking at night. And we never did that ever again after that night. When I was a teenager, my family used to spend summers in a remote cabin deep in the woods. It was an old place, passed down through generations, far from any neighbors or town. The only way in was a long, winding dirt road, and once night fell, the darkness around was absolute. I was about 16 then too, and those summers were supposed to be fun escapes from school. But 2 nights changed everything that I thought that I understood about fear. It all started on a cold summer night. I was alone in the cabin. My parents had gone into town for supplies, promising to be back by midnight. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the occasional hoot of an owl or some rustling leaves. Suddenly, though, I woke up gasping for air, heart pounding so hard that I thought it might burst. I couldn't move, like my body was frozen, but my mind was awake and screaming inside. This paralysis lasted for what felt like hours, and during it I heard whispering voices around me, soft, mocking, and unintelligible. At one point, I mustered enough strength to crawl out of bed and ran outside into the cold night air, desperate to escape whatever was choking me. I tried to call my parents, but my phone was dead. Shaking uncontrollably, I ran to the nearby outhouse and locked myself inside, and I just waited there until morning. When my parents returned, I obviously told them everything. They didn't dismiss me immediately, but they did look worried. My grandfather, he had always said that those woods around the cabin held restless spirits and warned us never to be alone at night. That summer, they left a small talisman near my bed, something to protect me while I slept. Well, weeks later, the strangest event happened when my friend came to visit. We had stayed up late, talking by the fireplace, but I kept feeling like something was watching us. When I finally went to bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread for some weird reason. My friend was asleep in the other room, but I felt myself slipping into a sort of, a strange state is the best way that I can put it. Not quite asleep, but not quite awake either. Then, without warning, my body began moving on its own. I stood, walked to the window, and stared out into the darkness, feeling like I was watching from outside of my body. I could hear my own voice whispering words that I didn't understand, cold and empty. My friend woke me up, hearing the whispers, and came to check on me. She found me standing rigid in the corner, eyes wide and unblinking. I couldn't respond to her, but she gently took my hand, grounding me back into reality. For hours I felt trapped in that sort of strange limbo, my mind and my body disconnected. The next morning I was exhausted too, and terrified, but my friend didn't judge me, thankfully. Instead, she helped me research the history of the cabin, and we found out that decades ago, someone had mysteriously disappeared in those woods, and they were never found. I don't know if that's related to what happened to me, but it's an eerie detail, right? Well, years later, I still wonder what those nights really were. Were they some kind of sleep paralysis, or were they something else entirely? My family, deeply spiritual, believed that the cabin was haunted by something restless, something that wanted to trap us, or me in particular. Now, whenever I feel uneasy at night, I carry a small charm from that cabin with me, a reminder of those long dark nights back there. Even though I've moved far away now, sometimes I feel the shadows reach out from the woods, reminding me that some places are never truly empty. I still kick myself for not capturing any proof of what happened that night. It sounds so bizarre that I doubt anyone outside of my co-workers would believe me. I know that. But a few years ago, I, female, was working at a small cafe located in a quiet shopping center. My shifts usually started after school and ran until about 10 p.m. The cafe had big windows facing the parking lot, making it easy for anyone outside to see in. Now, one slow Wednesday evening, our manager had left early, so it was just me and two other employees holding down the place until closing. Their names were Sam and Mia. We were near the counter chatting while I was organizing supplies when I noticed a figure walking by outside. What caught my eyes, though, was his outfit. He wore a patchwork suit made from mismatched scraps of fabric in all sorts of colors and textures. The suit looked homemade and a little bit tattered, I guess. On his head was a wide-brimmed hat decorated with dried flowers and feathers, and his face was hidden behind a weathered, expressionless wooden mask that covered everything except for his dark, intense eyes. At first, I thought that maybe he was some sort of a street performer, or maybe an artist. But then Sam pointed out that the man kept circling the front of the cafe, stopping to peer inside of the windows. He seemed to be staring directly at us too, through the glass, and weirdly, never blinking. For the next 40 minutes too, this man continued pacing back and forth. We all felt a growing unease as he pressed his masked face close to the window, tilting his head as if trying to get a better look. Occasionally, he would make slow, deliberate gestures with his hands, almost like silent signals, but completely unreadable. Mia needed to go outside to grab something from her car in the lot at one point, so Sam insisted that he would keep watch by the door. When Mia returned, she was visibly shaken. She told us that while she was walking through the parking lot, the man appeared apparently out of nowhere and simply stood there, watching her silently. Then, in the most unsettling moment, he slowly raised his arms and started swaying side to side, like some kind of an eerie ritual dance. Mia hurried back inside and Sam locked the doors immediately. We called the cafe owner, who then reached out to our manager. The manager rushed back, but by the time that he arrived, the mysterious stranger had disappeared without a trace. I walked to my car that night, feeling on edge the whole time, but thankfully nothing happened. Even now, I have no idea what that man wanted, or who he was, or what he was even doing. Whatever his reasons, though, the memory of that masked figure in the patchwork suit, it still gives me chills when I think about it. Weekends in my neighborhood, they always look the same. By mid-morning, you'd hear the rattle of basketballs on driveways, the click of sprinklers watering neat green lawns, or the occasional garage band trying to cover Nirvana. I never really fit into that picture, though. I was the kid who stayed inside, controller in hand, eyes locked on a glowing CRT screen. Some might have thought that it was lonely, but for me it was freedom. I could explore worlds that didn't care what I looked like or how fast I could run. The only exception to this, though, was my friend Mark. He lived a few blocks away and was the kind of older kid who always seemed to know about the coolest stuff before anybody else. He was into games my parents would have never let me play if they had known. Diablo, Duke Nukem, 3D Dungeon Keeper, and that Saturday, he agreed to lend me his copy of StarCraft. To me, that was like borrowing treasure. I remember practically jogging down his street, clutching the jewel case like it was made of glass. The neighborhood was calm that morning too. The sun was sharp and white overhead, the kind of heat that made the asphalt simmer even before noon. I had just turned onto the block that led back toward my house when I heard a voice. Hey kid! I stopped mid-step and turned. Across the street, parked at the curb, was a pizza delivery car. The glowing red sign on top made it easy to spot. The hood was up and a man in the driver's uniform was leaning over the engine. He waved to me as if we knew each other. "Hey, you mind giving me a hand real quick?" he called. But it didn't make sense. Even at 10, I knew that there wasn't much that I could do to fix a car. My dad worked on his own now and then, and I had never been trusted to even hold more than a wrench. What's wrong with it?" I asked, not moving closer. The man didn't answer directly too. He glanced back down into the open hood, then at me again. His tone was casual, but there was something forced underneath it, something rehearsed. I just need your hand with something. It won't take a second. Come here, I'll show you." That was when it hit me. Not a thought exactly, but more like a jolt of electricity in my chest. Something was off. The street was too quiet, the request too vague, and why me? Why would a grown man need help from a kid when he could knock on any door here in the street? I can't. I gotta get home," I stammered. I turned, walking faster now, the plastic edges of the game case digging into my palms. My ears were burning, my whole body aware of the silence around me suddenly. No lawnmowers, no dogs barking, no neighbors watering plants. Nothing. Just the sound of my sneakers scuffing against the sidewalk. I risked a glance back. The man thankfully wasn't chasing me. He hadn't even moved. He was standing there, hands on the hood, staring across the street, seemingly just watching me. That made it worse somehow too. I walked faster and then faster still until it became a sort of half run. My house wasn't far now, but every step stretched longer than the last, and with each one I was convinced that I'd hear the slam of a car door and pounding steps behind me at some point. But when I finally reached my driveway and yanked open the screen door, the street was now empty. For years, I told myself that maybe it wasn't as strange as it felt. Maybe he really did have car trouble. Maybe he was harmless. But then again, why ask a kid? Why not any of the adults who lived just feet away? And why, when pressed, couldn't he say what he actually needed help with? I never did see that man or that car again, but the memory certainly stuck, sharper than the games that I played, sharper than the teasing I endured at school. It was the moment that I realized that danger doesn't always show up as a monster in the shadows. Sometimes it pulls up literally in broad daylight, in a uniform that you even recognize, wearing a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And if I'd even taken a few steps closer that morning, I'm not sure that I'd be here to even tell this story. When I was about 20, I lived in a small town in a rented apartment above an old bookstore. The building had once been a family home, but had been converted into a few flats decades ago. The walls were thin, and the floors creaked loudly. But it was just me and my younger brother living there. Our parents had moved overseas for work, so it was mostly quiet, sometimes too quiet in fact. But one winter, after a particularly bad snowstorm, we noticed something pretty strange. At first, it was subtle, small noises like footsteps above the ceiling when no one was up there, doors that would be slightly ajar when we knew that we closed them. The heating would sometimes kick on randomly, even after we turned it off. But the weirdest thing was the sense that someone else was in the apartment with us. For instance, I'd be sitting in the living room and my brother would suddenly freeze and say, "Did you just hear that?" But when I asked what he meant, he couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling that he had. Well, one night I was alone doing my homework when the lights flickered and a shadow seemed to pass across the wall. I obviously looked up, but when I did, no one was there. Now, there was a tiny attic space accessed through a hatch in the hallway ceiling, locked shut with a heavy bolt. Our landlord said that it was just for storage and never used it. One evening, though, after hearing some strange noises, my brother and I tried the door. It was previously locked tight, but now the bolt had been slid open somehow. We peeked inside, but we saw nothing but dusty boxes. But then, when we shone the flashlight deeper, we caught a glimpse of what we swore were footprints in the dust that looked reasonably fresh, to be honest. Well, over the next few weeks, we started hearing faint whispers at night, always near the wall between our apartment and the one next door, which was supposed to be empty. The whispers were always too quiet to understand, but they sounded like urgent warnings or maybe pleas or something. But one night I pressed my ear against the wall and suddenly felt what I can only describe as like a cold rush, like breath on my skin. Upon feeling that too, I stumbled back, shaken. But the final night, that one was definitely the worst. We were watching TV when the room grew unbearably cold all of a sudden. The temperature dropped so fast that I could even see my own breath. The lights flickered off, and the whispers grew louder, now a chorus of voices, overlapping and desperate. Then, from the attic hatch, we both heard a low guttural growl echoed down the hallway. Panicking, we grabbed whatever we could to defend ourselves with and called the landlord. When he arrived, he opened the attic door, only to find it empty. But even he mentioned that he felt the cold lingering too. He told us that the house had a dark history apparently. Years ago, a tenant vanished without a trace, rumored to have been hiding in this attic. Well, we moved out shortly after this, and even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about what we experienced. I'm convinced that something was living there, something that shouldn't have been, something that was never meant to share our home. I don't know if this story will come across as scary or terrifying to anyone else, but whenever I think about it, it still makes my stomach knot. I thought that maybe putting it out there will help me stop replaying it in my head too, so that's why I'm here. This happened last year in a small coastal town in southern Portugal where I grew up. It's not a touristy area, more rural, mostly locals, and surrounded by abandoned farmland, crumbling greenhouses, and one very strange structure, an old hydrotherapy complex that closed down in the 90s. It was supposed to be a spa and water treatment resort or something like that. Now it's just broken glass, rusted steel beams, and overgrown concrete. Everyone in town knows that it's off limits, but for kids and teenagers, well, it's been a kind of urban legend playground for years. One night, though, in late summer, my friend Thomas and I, we were both 18 at the time, decided to explore the upper tower of the spa building, something that we'd only done once before during the day. Around this time, it was almost 11 p.m. and pitch black. To reach the top level, though, you had to climb 3 tiers. First, we broke in through a side panel near the old sauna room. Then we scaled a rusted staircase missing half of its steps. And finally, there was the last part, a 2-meter ledge that you had to sort of boost yourself up onto, using a stack of collapsed lockers nearby. We eventually made it to the top, though, and from there you could see the entire valley behind the resort, the pine forest, the dirt roads, and the entrance path through the fields. We were just sort of hanging out, joking, recording TikToks with flashlights when I noticed a flickering orange light in the distance. I thought that it was maybe someone walking with a phone flashlight, but it didn't move like that. It had a sort of, a strange rhythm, more like an old oil lamp swinging. And that was when I saw him. A man, far off near the edge of the forest path, holding what looked like maybe a lantern. He was tall, thin, wearing what looked like a long coat or a cloak. I couldn't quite tell because of the distance. But what unsettled me the most was the way that he was standing. He was completely still, like a statue, facing us. No movement at all except for the swing of the lantern. I nudged Thomas and pointed. He squinted into the dark, and then the man started walking, slowly but with purpose, straight toward the spa building. We both instantly froze. "Who the heck is that?" Thomas asked. "No idea, man, but I don't think we should wait around to find out." We scrambled back toward the edge, climbed down as fast as we could, barely holding on to the slippery rusted beams. Halfway down, I looked back. The man had now entered the complex grounds. The lantern light bobbed as he moved, but weirdly, we never heard footsteps, not once. And well, by the time that we hit the ground floor, I swear to you that I heard breathing coming from the tiled corridor behind us. Not footsteps, just long, slow inhalations, as if something or someone was standing just around the corner. We didn't speak, we just ran. When we burst out through the side gate and made it back to the road, we didn't stop then too, until we reached Thomas's uncle's house, and both of us were shaking. He kept asking if I thought it was some sort of lunatic squatter or something. I didn't answer though. I didn't want to say what I was really thinking. And after getting some sleep that night, we went back the next day, but there were no footprints, no broken twigs, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But the weirdest part, right at the top of the building on the ledge where we had been sitting, someone had placed a small glass lantern there, burnt out and blackened. And I know for certain that that lantern was not up there when we were. So I work as a night cleaner at an old mountain lodge retreat. It's a place that's been around for decades, known for its rustic charm, but also some weird rumors among the staff. Things like unexplained noises, strange shadows, and equipment that mysteriously malfunctions, things of this nature. Anyway, my shifts start at 10 p.m. and last until dawn, so I'm often the only person awake in the building after hours. The lodge has a large common area with a fireplace, a small game room, and a bar that closes early. After guests head to their rooms, it's my job to tidy everything up. Now, one night, about a month ago I would say, I was finishing up in the game room. The space is dimly lit, with old arcade machines lining the walls and a pool table covered with a faded green cloth. As I wiped down the machines, I noticed something strange. The air felt colder than usual, like a sudden chill that just didn't belong. I looked around and saw one of the arcade machines flickering, even though it was unplugged. Then I heard a faint noise, a rhythmic tapping coming from the hallway outside. Curious, I stepped out into the hallway, but it was empty and silent. The tapping stopped as soon as I moved closer. Well, I shrugged it off, assuming that it was just the old building settling or something. But a few minutes later, while I was cleaning near the fireplace, I caught sight of a shadow darting past the doorway. I blinked, but I could have sworn that I saw it, but when I checked, no one was there. But then came the strange part. So from the bar area, I heard some soft footsteps, slow, deliberate, almost as if somebody was pacing. I called out, but nobody answered. The lodge was supposed to be empty though, well, except for me. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously moved toward the sound. As I rounded the corner, I saw a figure, or what looked like one at least. It was tall, wearing what I can only describe as an old-fashioned maid's uniform, like something from the 1920s, but the face was blurred, almost like smoke or static or something. The figure didn't say anything. It just sort of stood there, watching me. And upon seeing it, I completely froze. And then, without warning, it just vanished. Almost like it just evaporated into thin air. And well, after that night, every night became a little bit weirder. Lights would flicker randomly, machines would start up on their own, and I'd catch glimpses of the uniformed figure in the corner of my eye, always watching and never speaking. One night too, I decided to stay in the bar area after finishing my shift. I sat down and pulled out my phone to record, and minutes later my phone started glitching out of nowhere really weirdly. The screen flickered and went all sorts of colors, and then it just went black. And that was when I felt it. A cold breath straight on the back of my neck. When I spun around, nobody was there, but in the grainy video that I reviewed later, you can just faintly see a figure standing behind me, the same maid, her face obscured but unmistakably watching. And well, after that, I quit the next day. I don't know who or what the heck that was, but I'm convinced now that that lodge holds onto the memories of its past staff or something. Or perhaps even something darker than that. But if you ever find yourself cleaning an empty lodge at night, take my advice and certainly watch your back. Because sometimes the night cleaner apparently isn't alone. Growing up, I used to think that ghost stories were just made-up nonsense, something people told each other to scare one another or explain weird noises in old houses. But what happened to me one summer, it certainly changed my thinking. So, I was spending the school break at my aunt's place in a small town far from the city. The house was this massive old Victorian thing, full of creaky floors, narrow hallways, and tons of rooms that nobody really used anymore. I was there because my parents had to travel for work, so my cousin and I were basically left to entertain ourselves. The attic, though, was the one place that we were both told to avoid. It was locked tight, full of dusty boxes and forgotten stuff, but I always felt a weird chill whenever I passed that door, like something was watching. Well, one evening a summer storm rolled in. Loud thunder rattled the windows and rain hammered against the roof, when suddenly the power went out and the whole neighborhood went dark. My cousin had gone to a friend's house, so I was alone in the house for the first time that evening. The main lights flickered off and I was left in near total darkness. I grabbed my phone off of the table, flicked on the flashlight, and tried to stay calm. It was eerie, sitting there with only the blue glow of the screen for company. I was scrolling through my messages, trying to distract myself, when I heard it. A slow creaking noise from upstairs. Not just a floorboard creaking or the wind rattling a window, too. This seemed to be deliberate, like footsteps or maybe even something dragging. My heart instantly started pounding. I knew the attic door was just a few steps away, at the end of the hall. It was supposed to be locked, and my mind told me to ignore it, but my feet moved before my brain caught up, and I found myself walking toward that door, phone flashlight leading the way. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the house, even with the storm outside. The walls seemed to close in suddenly. The shadows stretched and twisted like they were alive. The door, too, was slightly cracked open, a thin line of black darkness leaking through. I swallowed hard and flicked the flashlight into the gap. The beam caught nothing but dust motes floating in the stale air. I hesitated. Then, with a shaking hand, I pushed the door wider. Inside the attic, the beam of light hit piles of boxes, old furniture draped with sheets, and spiderwebs hanging from the ceiling beams. The air smelled like damp wood and something faintly metallic. And that was when I saw it. A shape standing motionless in the far corner. It wasn't fully solid, more like a dim, pale shadow that shifted and flickered, almost as if it wasn't quite part of this world. No eyes, no face, just a vague humanoid form, pale and blurry, with edges that almost seemed to dissolve into the dark. I froze, phone light trembling in my grip. The figure didn't move or make a sound, but I felt its gaze pierce right through me, like it was studying me almost, waiting. For what? I had no idea. But I blinked, and when my eyes opened, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no sounds, nothing but the silence of the empty attic now. My heart was racing so hard, though, that it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I slammed the door shut and bolted down the stairs. Back into the living room, I locked all the doors and the windows, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I texted my cousin frantically, but there was no answer. The storm was still raging outside, mind you, thunder booming and rain lashing the windows and everything. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and shadow made me jump. I kept the phone's flashlight on, watching the door to the attic like it was some sort of a portal to another world or something. And well, the next morning when the sun finally arose and the power finally came back on too, my aunt called to check on me. I wanted to tell her what I saw, but the words just wouldn't come out. I mean, would she even believe me? Would anyone? Days passed and the memory of that figure haunted me. I even stopped going near that attic at all. Sometimes I thought that I saw that pale shape in the corner of my eye too, just a flicker of movement when I was alone, but truly I don't know if that was just like trauma or something from the event, or if I was seeing something. Years later, I still get chills thinking about that night, and I know that that shadow wasn't just a trick of the light or anything. It was something else, something that was just standing there, seemingly just watching me and waiting. Back in the summer of 2012, my friends and I, 4 of us from a small town in northern England, were hanging out on a lazy Saturday night. We were all still in school and came from pretty quiet families, so nothing wild, just chilling and watching movies at my friend Luke's house. Luke and I arrived a little bit early though, so instead of going inside right away, we parked in the quiet cul-de-sac across the street. The street was lined with old houses, all with small porches and dim street lamps. It was a peaceful place. But that night, something felt off right from the beginning. After about 20 minutes, our other 2 friends, Mia and Josh, they showed up. They didn't come inside either, and they just climbed into the back seats of our car. We were all laughing and joking around, listening to some old songs, and it felt like a good way to escape the usual keep it down rules at Luke's house. It must have been around midnight too when a black SUV rolled slowly down into the driveway of the house next to Luke's. The driver sat there for a few minutes, engine idling softly. None of us could see his face clearly through the tinted windows, but it felt like the whole street fell silent just for a moment when he arrived. Then the driver stepped out. He seemed to be a man in his 40s, dressed in all black, a jacket zipped up tight against the summer chill and a dark cap pulled low over his brow. He looked directly at us, though, as he stood beside his vehicle, like he was trying to figure out if there was actually somebody inside of the vehicle paying attention. Luke whispered, "I've never seen him before. He doesn't live there." We ducked lower into our seats but kept watching. After a few minutes, the man moved toward the porch of the house, walking calmly but with a purpose. He didn't knock or ring the bell. Instead, he just stood there quietly, occasionally glancing around as if waiting for something. We debated quietly what to do. Should we call Luke's parents? Should we call the police? But none of us moved. We were all sort of frozen by the uncertainty, I guess. Eventually, though, the man turned and walked back to his SUV. He started the engine and began backing out slowly. We decided, maybe foolishly, to follow him a short distance too, just to make sure that he really left the neighborhood. He drove slowly at first, then sped up as we approached the end of the street. When he hit the main road, he disappeared into the night and we finally felt safe to turn back. Back at the cul-de-sac, we got out of the car and looked back at the porch where the man had been standing. The street lamp cast a dull glow over the steps, and for the first time we realized just how exposed we had been, sitting there in plain sight like that. We spent the rest of the night wide awake, nervously watching the windows, half expecting the black SUV to return at some point. It was a strange and unsettling night, but thankfully nothing else ever came from it. Looking back, I'm glad that we were there, to be honest, that we noticed and that we had kept watch, because that house, it has kids in it, and I don't know what that guy was doing, but it was sus as heck. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones that happen, I guess, but the ones that almost seem to. Like I said, we never did see that man again, but something tells me that he was either trying to break into that home or something, and because we were there, potentially, we stopped the whole thing. When I was around 13 or 14, I was living in India with my parents, and we had a live-in maid named Anaya. She wasn't just a maid though, more like family really, but she had her own little space attached to the house, like a small studio, with a bedroom and a tiny living area, separated from our backyard by just one wall. It gave her some privacy, but she was still close enough to be a part of the household. Now, for a long time, everything seemed pretty normal with her, but my mum started noticing something strange about her. She'd often hear Anaya talking to someone in the evenings. My mother was usually in the kitchen, which was right next to Anaya's room, and because the wall was pretty thin, she could catch bits of the conversation. The weird part? Anaya always claimed that she was just on a phone call, but my mum knew that her phone had been broken for over a week at one point, so she asked Anaya about it, and Anaya shrugged it off, saying that she was talking to someone on a landline or maybe just rehearsing conversations or something. It didn't add up at all. But one night, my mum was alone in the kitchen when she clearly heard Anaya laughing and talking to someone. The voice was low though, and it was definitely a man's voice. She asked Anaya later, but Anaya just smiled nervously and said that it was nothing. That little mystery stayed in the back of my mind, but life went on like normal. A few months later, Anaya left to work elsewhere, and we didn't think much about the strange phone calls anymore. Fast forward to the peak of winter, cold, quiet nights, and the house feeling unusually empty without Anaya. But we had recently installed motion sensor lights in the backyard, because the neighborhood had been getting a little bit unsafe after dark at this stage. One night at around 2 a.m. though, the lights suddenly flickered on. Dad, who is a bit of a light sleeper, got up to check. Our cat, Motti, sometimes sneaked outside, and Dad wanted to make sure that she was okay and bring her back inside. As he stepped into the backyard, though, Dad immediately froze. There was a man, mid-30s, scruffy with wild eyes, climbing over the low back wall of our property. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he looked like he had been living rough for quite a while. Before Dad could react, the man jumped down and disappeared into the shadows near Anaya's old room. Dad didn't hesitate. He quietly shut the door and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the house thoroughly, and what they found was shocking. The man had been living in Anaya's abandoned quarters for months at this stage. He had snuck in through the backyard at night, hiding during the day, and using the maid's old clothes and belongings to stay warm. Turns out, he had been seeing Anaya, visiting secretly and spending nights in that room while she worked. When Anaya left, the man decided to just, keep living there, like he owned the place. And none of us had any idea that he was even there. The creepiest part, though, thinking about all the times that I was home alone there, especially during the holidays when my parents were at work, and that this guy was probably just down the hall, hiding in the dark somewhere. He wasn't violent, thankfully, but just desperate and reckless, I guess. But the thought of someone living in our home without us even knowing was truly terrifying. The police arrested him, and thankfully he never came back after that. But the whole experience left a shadow over our family. We changed the locks, added more cameras, and Dad even installed an alarm system. Even now, years later, I still feel a shiver whenever I walk past that side of the house. Sometimes too, late at night, I swear that I hear whispers coming from that empty room. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most frightening things happen right under your nose, I guess, and the people that you trust might be keeping secrets that you would never expect. After a week of endless storms, the Saturday sky finally cleared. But my sister Lena, she suggested that we drive out somewhere new instead of wasting another day inside. I remembered a co-worker once mentioning Lost River State Park in Hardy County, West Virginia, and specifically a place called Cranny Crow Overlook. He told me that the view stretched out so far that you could see across 5 counties on a clear day. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that locals avoided being up there after sunset, though. I wasn't sure if that was mountain superstition or just a way to spook outsiders, but the name always stuck with me for some reason. Well, we threw a couple of bottles of water in a backpack, along with an old flashlight, and headed out. By the time that we reached the park's gravel lot near the White Oak Trailhead, it was already close to evening. A single dusty pickup truck sat crooked at the far end of the lot, but otherwise it was deserted. The trail was rougher than I expected. It climbed steeply, weaving through pine and oak that shut out much of the fading light. Within minutes, the only sounds were our footsteps and the wind threading through the trees. After nearly an hour, we crested Big Ridge Mountain and found the overlook finally. The stone shelter stood waiting, Simple, rugged, built of native stone by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. The structure was roofed but open on all sides, perched at the cliff's edge like something out of another time. From the shelter, the valley opened below us. The sky was bruised with purples and golds as the sun began to sink. We sat on the stone ledge for a few minutes in silence, taking it all in. For a moment, too, the climb definitely felt worth it. But then I noticed something odd. A faint sort of scratching sound inside of the shelter. At first, I thought it was just the wind pushing branches across the stone. But when I stepped closer, I saw fresh markings etched into the wall. Words, jagged and uneven. The cuts looked too clean to be decades old. It said, "Don't stay after dark." Let's head back, I whispered. Lena nodded immediately. We left the overlook as the last light drained from the sky, and on the descent, the woods felt, well, changed. Thicker somehow, heavier almost. Every so often, too, I caught the sound of movement, I thought, parallel to us. Something pacing, but just out of sight. And every time that we stopped, whatever was out there, it stopped too. And then came the smell. Faint at first, but sharp and chemical, drifting on the wind like melted plastic. My stomach knotted. Lena squeezed my arm, whispering, "Don't look back." We quickened our pace, stumbling over roots and loose stone. But just when the lot came into view through the trees, that was when I spotted it. The same dusty pickup that we had seen earlier was now gone, and in its place, directly in front of our car, lay something carefully arranged on the gravel. A crude figure made of sticks, tied together with twine, I would guess. We didn't touch it. We didn't even breathe, in fact. We just bolted to the car, locked the doors, and drove off down the winding mountain road, the headlights catching nothing but forest and shadow. Only when the park was miles behind us did Lena finally speak. "We never saw anyone, right?" I gripped the wheel, still shaking. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew that someone had been watching us that entire time. It had been a warm, late summer evening, the kind where the air feels sticky but the sky glows with fading gold. My boyfriend, his sister, her boyfriend, and I, we had been sprawled out across the backyard, board games scattered around, laughing and talking about everything from movies to old childhood memories. No one had been drinking. I mean, it was purely the kind of night where the world just felt calm and simple. As the shadows lengthened, though, we realized that it was pretty late. The group began tidying up, gathering the game pieces, cups and plates, while the cicadas buzzed faintly in the distance. His sister excused herself to use the bathroom at one point, leaving her boyfriend standing nearby, casually leaning. From his vantage point, he had a full view of the corridor that led into the house, through a glass door that reflected the last light of the evening. I followed my boyfriend as he carried the trash toward the boiler room next to the glass door. He usually teased me for trailing him like this, but tonight he just smiled, an almost rare private smile, in fact, and disappeared into this small, dimly lit room. It felt unusual, to be honest, but I didn't think much of it. I waited outside, half amused and half expecting him to poke his head out and jokingly complain. On a whim, I closed the boiler door room from the outside. The latch clicked into place and I grinned, anticipating a playful protest. The sister's boyfriend saw the scene through the glass and chuckled, assuming my boyfriend would respond in some exaggerated, teasing way. But nothing happened. In fact, minutes stretched on. The room remained silent and dark. At first, I laughed nervously, thinking that he was quietly plotting a joke, but the lack of even the faintest sound gnawed at the edges of my amusement. With a mixture of curiosity and unease, I finally unlocked the door and swung it open. And when I did, the room was empty, completely empty. A shiver immediately ran down my spine. My laughter faltered, replaced by an odd tightness in my chest. I called out his name, gently at first, then louder, hoping that he would reveal himself with a grin. But there was no answer. The room was as I'd seen it before, silent, dark, and uninhabited. His sister's boyfriend approached, peering inside with a furrowed brow. "Wait, he was in here?" he asked, disbelief lacing his voice. I nodded, my unease deepening as he admitted that he had also seen him enter. Confused, I went to find his sister. She was standing outside the house and pointed casually toward the couch on the front porch. And there he sat, hands folded on his lap, looking calm and genuinely puzzled. He had not entered the boiler room at all. He hadn't left the house at all, in fact. I recounted the events, every detail, but he insisted that he had come inside and remained inside the main room the entire time. He didn't tease or joke. He was honestly as confused as I was, it seemed. Even her boyfriend, who had witnessed the sequence through the glass, admitted that he couldn't explain what he had seen either. Well, for the rest of the evening, I avoided that boiler room entirely, unable to shake the feeling that something had briefly bent reality around us. No one could offer an explanation, and the rare smile that my boyfriend had given me earlier now felt like a memory from another world, a fleeting moment before something impossible had intruded on ordinary life. Even now, I hesitate whenever I walk past that door or see shadows in that corner, because I know what I saw, and yet no one, not even the person that I saw, seemingly was ever there. So here's the deal. I've been living with my extended family for about a month due to some issues that I won't get into, and since I've been in the basement, I've always felt as if I'm being watched. And at one point, while I was playing a game on my phone, I even felt a hand on my shoulder. I had headphones in, so I didn't hear anything, and I turned around thinking that it was my aunt or uncle, but there was no one there. That was the first thing that had me going, what the heck, and I've also seen some stuff move at the corner of my eyes, but that could be anything, so I won't just say ghosts. But what really got me scared and had me so terrified that I couldn't sleep was that I was in my room watching TV as my aunt and uncle had a small older TV. They didn't use it anymore, so I was watching Disney Plus on it, and also was watching some Family Guy. I was watching the episode where Braun got married to that girl who was dying. Anyway, all of a sudden I got this feeling of very intense fear and dread, like it was so intense that I never felt anything like this in my life. I turned off my TV and then tried to sleep, as I thought maybe some sleep would just make the feeling go away. It must have been around 2:30 in the morning. Don't judge, I have a bad sleeping habit. But then, all of a sudden, I heard one loud knock at the front door. My room is located right under the living room and front door as well. Obviously, I thought that this was a bit weird, and that intense feeling of dread and fear was still there too. Then, about 30 seconds after, I heard a knock right at the window right above me. I moved the curtain and there was nobody there, and I heard nothing. My window was shut and it was very audible, like it sort of sounded like somebody slammed their fist against it. And where the window was located, it's ground level on the side of the house, so it's possible that somebody was there, I guess. I got a feeling, though, that someone or something wanted to harm me all of a sudden. I sat up for about a minute trying to calm myself down, but I couldn't get over the feeling, and something in my gut was telling me to get the heck upstairs. I listened to my gut feeling, but as I was about to make my way upstairs, I could have sworn that I felt as if something was digging its claws into the upper left side of my back. This happened as I was leaving to go up the stairs, and I ended up staying up until 9 a.m. in the living room just watching Family Guy with the lights on. And weirdly, after that, everything was fine. I felt nothing wrong, but the occasional feeling of being watched, I guess, when trying to sleep. But I just chalked that up to being paranoid, and I wasn't too disturbed by that. This all happened about a week ago, and this brings me to about 5 hours ago. You see, I was upstairs in the living room watching some random show that my cousin was watching that I got invested in, when all of a sudden I got this weird feeling that started on my left side that felt like something was blowing air. It went through my left ear and then felt like it went into my right ear, and then there was this huge boom or loud ringing noise in my right ear. Then I got that feeling of fear and dread again, like something was wanting to harm me. After about 5 minutes of feeling this, I heard one of the decorations for Halloween go off outside. At first I didn't think too much of it, but then I realized it was the one that had a thing that you had to click to set it off, and you had to press it pretty hard on the button to set it off. I looked outside and saw the decoration, and didn't see anyone or hear anyone. After about another 5 minutes, it went off again. I looked outside immediately, and I didn't see anyone, but I swore that I heard something like scratching at the door. I sat on the couch and continued to sit there, and after like 10 minutes, that feeling of fear and dread, it finally went away. Something that I would like to add as well is that whenever the people that I was staying with were buying the house, the people who lived here before us apparently just upped and left without a word, which they found weird. And another creepy thing is that they found 3 mirrors lined up in the basement, covered by a cloth. One had a crack as well that they thought was pretty creepy when they saw it. Another thing too is that I know some of these things can be normal things, but it only happens when I'm either feeling a presence or the 2 times that I got that feeling of dread and fear out of nowhere, so I find that to be a pretty strange coincidence. Also, I'm not the only one who's seeing stuff, as my family have seen stuff as well. Usually shadows or something moving at the corner of their eyes and nothing is there sort of thing when they look. Also, we have a dog who randomly barks at the front door when there's no one there and will sometimes stare over there like he's looking at someone. I've also seen some shadows or apparitions, I guess you could say, too. The first time I saw something was on my 3rd night in this house. I saw out of the corner of my eye the shoulder and the hair of someone passing by the shoulder. It was white and looked like an old dress, as it had this sort of white piece on it. I don't know the word for it, but most likely you would see this on a grandmother. They would own something similar at least, and I also saw their hair, and it was black and curly. I only saw a small bit, but it was enough for me, that's for sure. My cousin confirmed too that she had seen the same thing and was actually kind of shocked that I saw her as well. The second time I was laying in my bed facing the room, and not the wall but just sort of into the vacant space, and as I was laying and falling asleep, I saw a very clear black apparition that wasn't fully there, like I could see clearly through, but there was the outline, and they walked across the room and looked to be sort of staring at me. However, they were fully black like a shadow, and I couldn't make out any details other than the face I think was a woman. When I saw that though, I ended up getting up and heading upstairs, as I was like, I don't want to be watched while I'm sleeping. So I went on the couch and I was browsing through my phone and was scrolling on Facebook. I left the door open that goes into the living room, and that was when I saw very clearly a shadow figure peek around the corner to look at me. I looked up where I saw it, but it wasn't there anymore, and all the hairs on my arm went up. I went back on my phone, and about another 30 seconds later, I saw it quickly peek at me again and go back, and I then yelled out, "Leave me alone." After that, I wasn't bothered anymore. I've been a believer in this stuff for years now. Well, kind of always have been, I guess, a bit of a skeptic, but right now I'm honestly a little bit scared, as I've never had something like this happen to me before. I'll also mention that the house that I'm staying in is 130 years old, and my other family members say that they experienced the feeling of being watched as well, but they've never mentioned what I've just said, so I don't know if there's anything more to their stories. In any case, please let me know if you know what I should do about any of this, or perhaps if I just need to go and, well, lock myself up. My brother and I were driving between two medium-sized cities late one night a couple of weeks ago. We live in Sweden, so it was pitch black where we were, and on this stretch of the road there was nothing but forest. At this time of the night, the road is pretty empty as well. It's kind of a narrow road without a space on the sides. It has low railings along the sides, and behind them there are high fences to prevent wildlife. So suddenly, as we're driving, we see a person on the side of the railing in our headlights, 10 meters in front of the car, I would guess. My brother was driving about 80 kilometers an hour, so he didn't have a chance to make a maneuver, but we drove by the person no more than half a meter in full speed. And we were shocked. After a few seconds, we both wondered what the heck that was. It happened so fast, but we agreed that it was a young woman dressed in black who was leaning or sitting in a strange way against the railing, and behind her on the other side of the railing stood a man in all black, hugging or holding her from behind with both arms. Behind them was the high fence, as I was speaking about earlier, so how did they even get there? There were no cars nearby, and there wasn't even anywhere to stop with a car, to be honest. Well, after a minute, we decided to call the cops, and they asked us to turn around to see if they were still there. We got back, but unfortunately, they were gone. The police did arrive and started searching with headlights, and we continued driving home. My brother and I were really shaken by this, and honestly, it's still haunting me. What was the deal with these people? Did the guy hold the girl so that she wouldn't run out in front of our car or something? Did the woman try to escape from the man? The only possible way forward for them was in the forest, without lamps in the cold, far away from any houses. In retrospect, it's easy to be wise, and of course, we probably should have stopped at once, but we didn't, and I really regret that. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal I felt, well, really out of control. So I'm sharing this as a part to gain control over my story. It's long and it's spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to listen to. So part 1. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice. Sorority-type girls, I guess you could say. Well, we decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, though, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How were they fighting in less than a day, right? I smiled and told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom anyway. I learned that her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking that her question was a bit odd. We were both in our 20s after all. I mean, of course I drank alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate, though. As I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her, to be honest. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and a lisp, I assumed that she must have been bullied. Nellie was different from me, though. She was shy and claimed to not have hobbies or friends, but I figured that since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was doing a good deed, I guess. Part 2. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy enough because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison, and I would open my door and then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. Now one night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed and she hurriedly put on her sandals and neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, Nellie silently following closely behind me. Eventually I found everything that I needed, but Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt and he looked in my bags, confirming that I hadn't stolen anything, as if I ever would anyway, but I didn't think much of this incident. But when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time, as my bags were being searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone or with friends. They only ever rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. Of course, I wasn't with her the whole time, but she was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to even think anything contrary. Part 3. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only other person with a bathroom key and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again though, toilet paper, hair and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper as well. I knew that I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic, so I sent a positive, non-aggressive text. I wrote, "Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please?" I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie, she never acknowledged the situation though. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me and sat with me in class. For the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it just never seemed to help. Nellie would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it all over again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie finally. I wrote, "Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I have to report you." I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided then too that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with anyway who didn't clog my toilet, and as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall like that, but I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. It would all work itself out. Part 4. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked too. Nellie had stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December and instantly my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly sweet sort of rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for about 2 weeks I just avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam and Poppy, they were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go and smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club apparently, and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam at least. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everybody fell silent. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh, I'll admit, and part of me felt bad for Nellie, but at least Christmas would be relaxing and hopefully we could all, get along a little better. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me some scented candles for Christmas, funnily enough. And when I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. Part 5. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined this, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much, really. And despite everything, I still wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things that I could talk with Nellie about, attempting to break the awkward silence a bit. So I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were like teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I just changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin I barely put my ear against it and I can hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and genuinely a little bit scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly at that and nodded. I genuinely had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie suddenly slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from Sri Lanka, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me that she was from Sri Lanka. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to open more than usual when she said this. She was scaring me. and I didn't want to be rude, so I said that I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a disingenuous maybe. Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and I went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early instead, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. Part 6. So the next day, I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m. I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, though, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was terrible, but the sight was even worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned to anger as I messaged Nellie. I said, "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." And I pressed send. It was at this moment that I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom, but Nellie had ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report it. So I laid down to take a nap instead. 2 hours later, I was woken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for about 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, and then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over again. The shock of it made me stumble back into my bed. Then, as suddenly as it had started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed, and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. She wrote, "The cockroach screamed, 'Why do this to me?' Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation," the doctor said. "The doctor pulls off the cockroach legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach." I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp again. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for about an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had just happened before going to bed, and that night, I can tell you that I barely slept. I was way too scared to close my eyes. Part 7. I awoke the next day anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each row as she passed. I sort of sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet me at eye level as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up in a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to snap. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going and I lied to her, saying that I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch, and as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. "You weren't at the cafe?" Nellie's eyes darted up at me. She was looking at a knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond though. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid that she'd use the knife on me all of a sudden. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for a total of about 10 minutes before just turning around and leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I decided to move to a different spot. But Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to get lost. I was surprised when Nellie did just that too. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I'd be smart to move out, and honestly, they were right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I needed to get away. Part 8. I went to Reagan's apartment as she was the closest person that I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted that they needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam. So I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan that I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates with distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed blood and orange liquid pooled across the floor leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself, that's for sure. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options, and I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board, and things moved quickly. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me, and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her, and I thought that moving would stop her obsession with me, but again, I was incredibly misguided. Part 9. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nellie's incidences had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding Nellie-related thoughts, and I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle, and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me again, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with a crowd toward campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan, past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began to walk again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie literally jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words cannot explain how terrified I was in that moment. Nellie let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. After a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie suddenly stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said, while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified the whole time, while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie stuff, but I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled, no matter what. Part 10. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the Disciplinary Board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions with them. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything that I reported was factual, but they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent. So they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion and asked them what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. Genuinely, I was at a loss for words about this. I couldn't believe that Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I had said, and knew the witnesses' names too. The school, as far as I was concerned, had put us all in danger. Yet, they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care, that they were going to prioritize a predator over us. But with really no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie had done to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew then that that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help and she would not stop stalking me. That much was clear. Part 11. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidences every time that they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order, and they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims, unfortunately. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie. They genuinely looked terrified too. They looked a lot like me. Having incidences happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. But I wanted revenge. A natural result of the boiling rage that I felt, I know, but now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she had imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way that she had made me suffer. I know that if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment that I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I share here, I cannot begin to recreate the evil that just radiated off of Nellie. I still have daily night terrors. I don't go into new situations lightly. I don't speak to new people, and I don't really make any new friends. I'm also not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life ever again. But revenge, it came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of the graduates. She had failed her second year, but despite everything, and I know this is going to sound a bit weird, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Who knows though, maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. So last year, me and my ex were living in a cottage with our son and my stepson. We lived on a property where the landlords were right there, basically. But we got along great though. Their son was a friend of mine and my father went to school with the landlords too. The lady had her brother living with them who is on the spectrum, but it's more like he's just awkward more than anything. Now, I've had suspicions of someone in our house because We would notice things moved around and drawers open. I would always be missing money and all of my change was gone too. That started many arguments between us because I thought that she was stealing my change and cashing it in, and it was all silver coins that I've collected for years. My ex thought that I was stealing money out of her car, and I thought that she was taking out of my car as well. Sometimes too, she would wake me up in the middle of the night, saying that she just heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs, which is the main floor. I would get up and look, and I didn't see anybody. This happened a few times. Sometimes when my ex would get home early from work too, she said that she would hear the downstairs door close, but didn't see anybody outside. I've come home from work early around noon when everybody knows that we're normally at work till 5. And one day I came home and the landlord's brother was sitting on my front steps. I said, "What's up? What you doing?" And he said, "I'm sitting, I just got the mail and was dropping it off to you." I literally grabbed the mail out of the box on my way in though, and we have separate mailboxes, so it's not like it was mixed with theirs. I told him, "Don't be creeping around up here. I don't need you on the steps in my area when I get home from work." One time, everybody was down by the pool, and I came down and yelled down to everybody that I'm having a barbecue for them. Where I was standing, I could see into the room where their step-grandfather was staying, and he's loaded. Always has a wad of cash, like 10K or more, with him. When I yelled down, I heard a commotion and saw him closing drawers and running out of the room, and came outside and creep-lit a smoke. I could tell that he was shaking in his boots though, thinking that he got caught doing something. I told Grandpop that he was in there and he lost it on him. But now for the creepy part. So I've told the landlord that her brother has been snooping in my house, and now I caught him snooping in their house for money as well. We've been out of there for about a year now, and he started messaging my ex on Facebook trying to talk to her. She ignored him for a while, and he kept video calling her, and she wouldn't answer and then blocked him. He found her Insta, her TikTok, and every other platform, and kept messaging her. She finally answered and asked if everything was okay, and he started confessing his love for her, saying that he wants to see her and my son. He then said, "I have your panties and leggings." He told her, "I'm on my way home from work and I'm going to put your undies on and watch some explicit material." She obviously said, "What the heck are you talking about? How do you have my underwear?" And he told her that he would sneak into the house and go through her stuff. There were times that she would call me after I went to work and would ask if I'm there because she would hear the door open as she was in the shower. He started sending screenshots of his phone, showing her that he has her as a background because of how much he loves her, and that he likes to put her leggings on and play with himself to her pictures. While living there too, the landlord's kid was telling us how he hears him playing with himself in his room and plays videos really loud, and him screaming her name as he was doing his thing. We didn't really believe it at first, but now, holy cow. He was working at a farm that is also a doctor's office. He was fired because he was sneaking into the house and watching this girl that lived there sleeping. Also because he was apparently creeping on children in the playground at the doctor's, and he had no reason to be over there when his job was on the other side of the property. Which means that this guy is an absolute creep. He told my ex that he has 13 articles of clothing that he took from her as well and is very proud of it. Told her that he has underwear and clothes from other women that rented the cottage as we did. He thought that this was okay and would somehow make my ex attracted to him. He started asking for her address so that he could send her stuff back to her, saying, "Why do you hate me, baby? I'm in love with you and I can do everything you like." He then said, "I've seen how he makes love to you and I could do so much better." And what the heck, right? Was he watching us? He was definitely watching us sleep. My son slept in the room with us and he was a newborn in that house, and we were there until he was 3 before we moved. My stepson had his own room which had a door to the outside, so he would have had to have walked through his room to get into ours. My stepson was uncomfortable, saying that he hears things at night on the window and that sometimes the window would open by itself too. She is going to bring all that stuff that he texted to her and admitted doing to other people to the cops because he needs to be stopped. And so, there's my story. What do we do next though? I mean, I don't need this guy trying to creep on my ex and my son. It's all very unsettling and the whole thing has really disturbed me. When I was around 12, my friend and I saw something that I could never explain. And honestly, if someone had told me this, that they saw this, I wouldn't believe them either. But I know what I saw. So the house that I grew up in, it was on the corner of a city street. The way the house was situated, from my bedroom windows looking out, I had two large ones side by side. You could see the street and the entire side of the house across from us. A guy friend of mine lived on the second floor of that house, and him and his family were gone for the weekend. My friend and I were in my room playing Nintendo, and I was sitting on my bed facing the windows. It was evening, but must not have been later than like 6 or 7 because my friend wouldn't have been over too late. It was her turn playing and I'm watching the screen, but something catches my eye and I look out of my window and see something in the friend who has gone for the weekend's home. It looked like what you would describe a Yeti to be. It was white, as tall as the ceiling and covered in hair. I frantically told my friend to look and she paused the game and immediately saw the same thing. We got down on the floor and crawled to my window to watch this thing. Whatever it was destroying the house, like breaking chairs, breaking dishes, ripping up the sofa, etc. I remember asking my friend if she was seeing what I was seeing, and she confirmed that she was. We watched this thing for a good few minutes, and then kind of started diverting our attention to other things in like a, oh my goodness, what the heck way. And when we eventually looked back, whatever it was gone. We both kind of seemed to instinctively know that this was something that should stay between us. In other words, it wasn't discussed, but the vibe was definitely still there. Now, in order to get home, she would have to walk past that house, so she had her dad pick her up that day. I tried my best to sleep, but I kept waking up and looking out to see if I saw it again, but I didn't. Now, the next day I was sitting outside of my house waiting for the friend who lived in the house to come home. I felt like I needed to be there when, well, they eventually came running out of their destroyed home so that I could try to explain what we saw the night before. They pulled up sometime in the afternoon and I hid behind my door in some kind of fear, I guess. Like, I knew that this was going to be bad sort of thing and I was scared to be a part of it, really. I watched them go inside and I wait and wait and, well, nothing. Eventually, the friend and his dad came out to get the luggage from the car and look as nonchalant as you can be. At this, though, I am absolutely confused. I mean, the house was destroyed. We saw it happen. I go across the street to my friend and he greets me and I'm kind of like, what's up? Everything cool? And he starts talking to me about something and it hits me that the house is fine. Everything was as they left it. At this point, I'm just so confused because I know what I saw and I have a witness. Later on, the friend who witnessed this event and I talk, and neither of us can understand what the heck happened. But life just kind of moved on. It wasn't until I was an adult and I read about the so-called glitches in the Matrix that I started to think that that might have been the explanation for what I saw. Some poor prehistoric creature got whirled into a house, freaked the heck out, and then glitched, returning everything to its normal state. I mean, yeah, it sounds kind of crazy, I know, but I racked my brain for decades trying to come up with something more based in reality, and I just cannot land on anything. I've only ever told 2 people what we saw that night, my mum and my husband. Neither outright say that I'm lying because they know me and they know that I'm not someone who tells stories like this, but they don't seem to enthusiastically believe me either, I guess. And look, I get it. They probably think that I saw something that they can logically explain, but I swear, unless you saw it, it's impossible to know just how real it was. Years ago, my ex-wife and I were visiting her grandmother for the 4th of July in an old mining town in Montana. Her grandmother lived in the home that she was born in, built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, an old brick and stone house cluttered with era-appropriate furniture, paintings, and decor. Very old and very eerie. Now, after a day of barbecuing, sightseeing, and lighting off of fireworks, myself and my ex-wife head to bed. The room that we were staying in was off of the kitchen, but was 2 small bedrooms connected with a hallway between, and a single door back out to the kitchen. My ex falls asleep immediately, and I laid there a while before hearing her grandmother come in and take the bedroom attached to ours. She gave up her own bedroom to my ex's parents, who were also staying. I hear the creaks of an old bed spring as she adjusted to lay down when all of a sudden she starts mumbling, progressively getting louder, clearer, and more violent. She starts cursing and saying something to the effect of, "Leave me the F alone, my family is here," and a whole lot of FUs. By this point, I am in complete shock as I've known her for years and had never even heard a curse word come from her mouth. She starts to say no, no over and over, and from the corner of her room across the hallway, a straight shot from her, I'm laying, I hear a very sort of labored gasping, breathing sound, like someone is halfway breathing underwater or through a machine or something. The breathing picks up faster and louder to the point of being deafening, and lasts for, well, I don't know how long. My eyes are pinned shut now, and I feel the most dreadful and discomforting feeling that I've ever felt in my life. Truly the worst feeling I've ever experienced. Even with my eyes shut too, I feel as if the room is growing darker and darker from that corner as the breathing continues. And then, just like that, it stops. Her grandmother shifts out of bed and goes to sleep on the couch. As she's leaving, I manage to muster just enough courage to open my eyes, and from the light of the kitchen I see her leaving, and right behind her is what I can only describe as an enormous dog. It had to be 4 or 5 feet tall at the shoulders. She did have a black lab, but it never came in with her, and it wasn't in there when I laid down. And what I saw, it had to be double the size anyway. It was definitely not her dog. I've experienced some paranormal activity in my life, but that day, that is the only one that terrifies me. Tonight, my fiancé and I were able to tour a haunted asylum. After a brief history of the place given by a guide, we were permitted to walk around all 4 floors of the asylum for as long as you'd like. Everything was going great too, and I got some neat pictures of an original electrotherapy chair and things like that. In the attic floor, there's a room at the very end that's extremely large, and it was set up with a ton of candles and these sort of little memorial obituaries printed out. On the right, there's a tiny crawl space, and I wouldn't have been able to fit in it, nor would my fiancé or any regular-sized adult. I went into the room with my fiancé, and there was another smaller room off to the left side. He goes into that room to check it out, and at this point, I'm extremely interested in the obituaries, and I'm reading them out loud. In about 3 or so minutes, he comes back. I'm still reading these obituaries to him now that he's back, and that's when the air starts to feel really heavy, and the more I read, the more tense I feel. At some point, we both had our back to the crawl space, and something like a pebble is thrown from the crawl space and hits the opposite wall. I look at my fiancé and turn toward the crawl space. Another larger piece of brick flies out and hits the wall. Obviously, we are both freaked out and turn to leave the room. My fiancé is walking in front of me with his flashlight, but as soon as we get out of the room, I hear scraping followed by footsteps. I look at my fiancé and he nods, saying that he heard it too. I turn around and wait to see if someone is coming out of the room. The noise stops at the door, and I can assure you that there was no one there. Upon hearing that, we hightail it out of there and go down to the ground floor and head outside the asylum. We are both excited and freaked out at the same time that we had experienced something down there. The atmosphere was so heavy when we got outside that it felt like every muscle in my body was tensed. I took some time and we headed home after a few minutes. This wasn't the only thing that happened though. You see, when we were taking pictures of objects like chairs and such, my phone kept refusing to take the picture, stating that my subject wasn't close enough to the camera. It kept doing that autofocus thing where it finds faces, and it was just focusing on air above the chair where a face would be. That was a bit freaky, but technology is weird sometimes, so I'm not too sure about that one. Anyways, it was fun, and I'm thoroughly freaked out now because that crawl space thing was certainly not any technological error or something to that effect. This happened to my best friend and I when we were 16. It was the weekend and we live in rural Montana. We heard that the Milky Way would be brightly on display that night, so we hopped into my car and decided to go park on a back road with little light pollution with some snacks and enjoy the show. At the time, I had a 2001 Toyota Echo, and it was my pride and joy. I opened up my sunroof, and we found a nice little pull-out on a gravel road that I had driven well over 100 times. We locked all the doors, put our seats back, and stared up at the beautiful starry sky as we chatted and ate our snacks. We were in a farm area. There was one little house about a mile behind us. The house was quiet and the outside light was on, but it was nearly 1 a.m. After about half an hour, we began to hear footsteps on the gravel road approaching us from the rear. It was dark, but the sky lit up the outside well enough for us to see our surroundings for a good distance. We couldn't see anything walking on the road though. Growing up on these back roads, you learn over time what different animals and humans sound like walking through the woods or on the gravel like this. I'd been on these roads my whole life and could tell that this was not an animal. It was far too noisy, and the heel would scuff the rocks as if it was a heavy pair of boots. We watched intently, but right when it sounded close, it stopped. But then we heard whistles. High-pitched, eerie whistles. At first, my friend said that it sounded like a recall whistle, like maybe someone nearby was calling their dog. But then they got short, and they were sporadic with no real pattern. At that, I closed the sunroof and we began packing up to go. I threw the blanket on the back seat, and we put away our snacks. The hairs on my neck, though, they suddenly stood up, and right when I was about to mention it, the handle of the rear door got yanked really hard, like someone tried to open the door. It snapped like it was let go hurriedly. I looked out that window the moment that it happened, and there was nothing there. There was nowhere to hide too. My mirrors were pointed in all the right places, so I had a good view no matter what angle I looked, and we didn't hear anyone run away either. Goosebumps suddenly formed all over our arms, and I threw it into drive and sped off. The next day I returned. I wanted to look for footprints or some sort of an explanation for what happened that night, but really, there just was none. It was quiet, and the only trails in the gravel were tire tracks from the night before. I don't know what it was, but to this day we get scared when we talk about it. So I live in the beautiful state of Montana, and have for my whole life. Just like everywhere, there are some really haunted locations here. I love to visit them and learn the history of Native American battlefields in the Old West, and Deer Lodge State Prison is one of those locations. Built in 1871, there is so much crazy history here. I highly recommend the visit if you ever get the chance. The location has been investigated by many paranormal teams, including Zach Baggins and the Ghost Adventures crew. I didn't go to investigate ghosts, I just went to learn the history, but I encountered something anyways. I've been 3 times now, and I have encountered something every single time too. My first experience happened in the hole, and not the original hole from back in the 1800s, as that one is not open to the public, but the solitary confinement cells found beneath the eerie shower room. Throughout the whole visit, I just felt dizzy and sort of heavy, I guess. I have had many paranormal experiences and am very sensitive too, so this was not something that freaked me out, but still, the hole was the darkest presence that I'd ever felt. I placed my palm on the floor and the entire space seeped its heavy energy into me. I thought for a moment that I would pass out, but I put my walls up, and that's when I heard screaming in my head, the voices of prisoners losing their sanity alone in the dark, I would guess. I even heard a voice say out loud, "Turn the light on." My husband, who was actually in the cell, thought that I was the one who said it, which freaked me out because it meant that he heard something too. He replied, "There is no light, honey, duh." The second experience was in one of the very small original cells at the far end of the property. These cells were not part of the cell block. They were completely concrete and super tiny. I walked in mortified at the conditions that these prisoners were forced to live in. My best friend was ahead of me, peering around the small quarters. These cells consisted of 3 sleeping cells and a shared bathroom. I stood near the door, and suddenly I felt a burning move from the top of my bra strap down diagonally towards the center of my back. At that, I ran out of there, suddenly feeling like I couldn't breathe anymore. I also had 3 distinct scratches when my friend checked, and if you're familiar with the paranormal, then you know what that indicates. That same day, we went into the women's prison side too. My husband felt super uncomfortable, like he wasn't supposed to be in there. He told me that his skin was tingling uncomfortable, like he was being shocked or something. I said, "He's with me, please leave him alone. He just wants to know your story," out loud. And after that, my husband felt fine and was able to finish the tour comfortably. The other guy with us was so uncomfortable though that he left the building before I even knew what he was experiencing. I think that the women felt violated by having men in there, is my best guess. I'm very fascinated by the place, and I'll be going back for sure. Each time I experience or feel a different thing, and there are countless spirits there, and honestly, it's a really, really amazing experience. I'm a girl living in Northern Europe. I won't go into too much detail as to where this happened because I don't want people to recognize me from this story. This story, though, takes place in October when I had a part-time job in this research center. This was in a bigger city, not like in the middle of it, but it was a 30-minute bus ride from where I lived at the time. Keep in mind, too, that the workplace was in an industrial estate, so the only people that really spent time in the area were the workers from these companies. I worked all 3 shifts, morning, evenings, and nights, but I did mostly night shifts because none of my co-workers really wanted them, and I'm a bit of a night owl anyway, so that 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift worked really well for me. Now, this happened on one of those night shifts. It was a Thursday night, and I was one of the 3 workers there that night. We didn't work together. We all were in our own sort of departments doing different kinds of work, also far from each other in the building. I worked at a chem lab doing water analysis, so it was not any kind of customer service job. We were basically all alone, and it got usually really quiet and rather peaceful. We had no security guards, but it was pretty much impossible to enter the building without an identification card. All doors were locked, and everyone that worked there had these cards where you hold it in the sensor on the door and it opens. You also got to use the card when leaving the building as well. These locked doors were not only on the outside but also on the inside of the building as well. So if anyone somehow managed to get through the first door without the card, they couldn't really get any further into the building, to the labs for example. The door locks again immediately after you get in or out as well. Considering all of that, we never really had to worry about someone uninvited getting in, even in the nighttime. This particular night, I took a bus and headed to work. I greeted my co-workers that were leaving as their shifts had just ended, and met the other night shifters in the women's dressing room. All normal, I was in a good mood, and so were my two co-workers. When our shift started, we parted our ways and went to different labs. I was 3 hours into my shift at 1 a.m. when I decided that I needed to take a 20-minute break. The two co-workers had went to their break earlier than me, so I had to go alone this time. Our break room was this sort of lounge area where there was a couple of long tables, chairs, mini kitchen and a bathroom. I'm not gonna lie, this big hall with old flickering ceiling lights was not my favorite place to be alone at 1 in the morning, when the whole building is almost empty and it's pitch black outside. There were big windows in the lounge, but I couldn't see anything out of them, just darkness pretty much. There was always this same eerie vibe at night, so I was used to it, I guess. 5 minutes into my break, I decided that I was going to go outside to smoke a cigarette. I put on a jacket, took my stuff with me, and opened the door with the card. Now, we had this sort of smoking place in the back of the parking lot, about 1 minute walk from the door. If I said I wasn't scared to be alone in an empty parking lot at night as a young girl, I definitely would be lying. This was the only thing I really did not like about the night shifts, but I really needed that cigarette. Nothing bad had ever happened before, and I live in a generally safe country, so I basically just hoped for the best. But there was this really nasty-looking white plastic chair in the smoking place. I sat in it and I lit my cigarette. From the smoking place, I could see clearly to the entrance of the building. There were bright lights above the door. Usually, I just stared at that door without even noticing it. I mean, it was a night in the industrial estate area, and there were not many interesting things to really look at. When all of a sudden, I noticed a person walking up to the door. It was a man in a trench coat and a top hat, holding a briefcase. I had never seen this man before, in my work or anywhere near this place. This man stood still in front of the door, not moving at all, facing the door. Even though nothing seemingly bad had happened yet, just a weird man standing by the door, I cannot even explain in words how scared I suddenly become. I had to somehow get past that man to get back inside. He doesn't know that I'm here, he didn't see me, but what if he does something to me when I'm trying to get inside? Is he trying to get inside? What does he want, and who is he? This was the only door where I could enter the building from outside, so really I had no choice but to try and ignore that man on the door and get inside. But what on earth is this weirdly dressed man doing in this area at 1 o'clock in the morning of all times? There is clearly something that he wanted from us, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know what that was. I started walking towards the man in the door while he was still standing, not knowing that I'm here in the parking lot. The closer that I got, though, the more scared I got. I had to stop and think again. I knew that it was part of my job to confront unwanted people, trying to get in and tell them how to contact our customer services, but keep in mind, this is 1 in the morning. A weird man who appeared out of thin air and an 18-year-old girl alone. I had this gut feeling that I should not go to that door. I decided to call my co-worker that was there that night and ask if she could meet me at the door and let me in, so I didn't need to face this man alone. So I went and hid behind my coworker's car that was in a parking lot to make a call. I was hiding behind the car in this position where I could still see this man through the car windows. I wanted to see if he would leave, and if he did, where he would go. My coworker answers the call, and when I start whispering in the phone and explaining the situation, I watch in horror as the man turns around and stares right at the car that I was now hiding behind. I don't know if he actually saw me. I don't think that he did, but he for sure heard that there was a woman talking behind this car. And what happened next was honestly straight out of a horror film. When this man found out that there was someone behind the car, he started slowly and quietly approaching me, not knowing that I could see him through the window. But here's the thing, he didn't walk, he didn't run. Instead, he was on all fours, crawling towards the car. I couldn't even scream. I just froze from fear and the phone dropped from my hand. When this man was getting closer to the car, I see both of my coworkers opening the door, waving and screaming at me to run and come in. And they did not need to tell me twice. I ran inside quickly, so fast the man didn't even have time to react, and when he got up and started running after me, the door was suddenly closed. The second that he heard the door lock itself, he then just suddenly turned around and started speed walking away, eventually disappearing into the darkness. We called the cops immediately, and they came not long after. They didn't find anything or anyone. That man just disappeared as fast as he had appeared, and no one has seen him since. After the shift, my co-workers walked me to the bus stop and they waited with me till the bus arrived, making sure that I got home safely. I am forever thankful though to these lovely women for opening the door for me before that man got me, and who knows what he would have done to me. I haven't done any night shifts after that, and for sure I never will ever again. This incident took place in the summer of 2023. Last year, I transferred with my company to take a new position in a major Midwestern city. My spouse was still working and living back in California for the next few months, so I rented a studio apartment for myself in a newly renovated apartment building in a popular downtown neighborhood until we could look for a place together. The apartment was small, but it was nice. It was in a secure building with interior hallways and a nice downstairs lobby. I was one of the first tenants to move into this newly renovated building, and other new residences soon started moving in too. A major advantage of this move was that I'd only be a couple of hours' drive from my hometown and my parents as well. I started my new job and everything was going great. I was enjoying my new neighborhood, and the neighbors in the apartment building generally kept to themselves, like I did. Then, a new guy moved in across the hall, and everything changed. David was a single man in his 60s and was very different from the college students and young professionals who lived in our building. I started noticing his erratic behavior almost immediately. I would come home from work and he would be sitting in his car in a small parking lot just sort of staring off in the distance. We were having issues that summer with smoke clouds coming over from the vast Canadian wildfires. They were leaving a light dusting of ash on our cars similar to pollen. David, though, was convinced that someone was spraying this dust on his car and was accusing various tenants that he would run into in the parking lot. He would hoard trash in his apartment and leave trash bags in the hallway, causing a foul odor. He would also be yelling to himself in the hallway. I finally had enough and I complained to the leasing office. The manager was quick to dismiss my concerns, saying that she'd been in this apartment and everything was apparently fine. In August, though, my parents' 50th anniversary was coming up and I was excited to go home and spend a weekend with them. A few days before their anniversary, My boss informed me that he would be flying into work on an important project with me that would have us working throughout the weekend. I was really disappointed and I felt like I was letting my parents down, but I managed to get away for a quick overnight trip in the middle of the week to see them and get back before my boss was due to arrive. I drove down and I spent the night with them, and the next morning I checked my email as I was getting ready to head back. There was an email from my apartment manager in regard to the incident the night before. The email was very vague, but it stated that a resident was dead and there would be further details coming later. But my heart sank and I immediately went pale. My mind instinctively went to my strange neighbor, David. I opened up a local news app for my city, and the top story was an active shooter in my apartment building who was killed during a SWAT team standoff the night before. Apparently, David approached my next-door neighbor in the hallway with a gun and threatened to shoot him. The neighbor ran into his apartment and called 911. David also called 911 and told the dispatcher that his neighbors were hacking his phone, and if the police didn't come, he was going to start shooting people. The police came and tried to talk to David, but he had barricaded himself in his apartment and claimed to be heavily armed. The state police and the SWAT team soon arrived, and David began firing a rifle out of his window at anyone that he saw in the parking lot below. All of the neighbors on my floor were trapped in their apartments with no way of escape. They had to get down and barricade themselves from the gunfire. There was another building across the street with a direct line of sight into our apartment building. A police sniper took position in the building across the street and shot David through his window. When they flew a drone into his open window and confirmed that he was dead with a gun still in his hand, they went in. Luckily, nobody else was injured. I got home later that day to a bullet-riddled apartment building, and several neighbors who normally didn't speak to each other were hugging and crying and showing each other videos of the incident from their hiding places. I've never been so lucky to have been out of town. If my boss hadn't have messed up my plans, I would have been home that night, and who knows what would have happened. I'm sorry David didn't get the mental health attention that he needed, honestly, but he put so many lives in danger, and I'm just really glad that I wasn't there. I grew up in a small Southern Californian town, known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments and also shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around when I was growing up in the late 90s. My friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back then. We were just general miscreants, I guess, but there was one time that I truly believe that we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone listening to this also grew up in the 90s, then you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day, and our parents would have no idea where we were. And there were lots of kidnappings back then too, and I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said that I'd go and check with my mum, and by the time that she'd get outside ready to whoop some butt, they'd always be gone. Anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good one day after school like always. We were traipsing around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal dam things off of the irrigation channels and tossing them wantonly. All of a sudden, though, we heard a sharp whistle, and both looked up to see this man about maybe 25 feet away from us, wagging his finger and going, But his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage that we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove, because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear, and I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy. Then we looked at each other, and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run." I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint toward us now. Despite the physical exertion that he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still on his face. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing that the guy wasn't behind us anymore. We quickly forgot about it because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing Mario. I cannot remember if it was the next day or week or what, but sometime after this happened, we were both with his mum getting donuts and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. He was apparently wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up. Maybe it's because we were at an age where we'd be relentlessly bullied by homophobes because of the mere possibility that we could have been, assaulted like that. But we never did speak of it again. As I'm sharing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers and if it aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here and I even have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like this, and these days I always have my head on a swivel. This is a story from what a friend and I saw 7 years ago. It was the week of my birthday, November 2nd, 2017, and as I shared a birth date with one of my gamer friends, we decided to have a weekend birthday party that would take place from the 3rd to the 5th. One of my friends had to go to work that Friday and work for a couple of hours before he could come back, but he didn't arrive. I offered to drive him there and back as he was a very good friend, and I didn't want him to miss the first night of TTRPGing. Also, since I had reached an age where I wasn't drinking as much as I did in my early 20s, it felt like a good time to get together. He worked as a floor cleaner in a chain store in our home state of Michigan that was 20 miles away from my house, so I was fine with just waiting in my car with my book. Now, I work in the criminal justice field and am trained to observe and retain details about notable events. I'm still able to recall critical events from 12 years ago with great detail. Also, my friend was present and confirmed everything that I saw. He may not work in the criminal justice field, but he did go to college focused on it, and he is a great observer, often noticing things that all our friends miss. Anyway, it was 2 a.m. when we drove to this job. Being the gamers and the sci-fi fantasy fans that we are, our conversations were filled with our geekiness the whole way up. Driving north along this Michigan highway, we didn't see anything other than some white-tailed deer movement, which in the rural area of Michigan is not out of the ordinary, and it seemed to be another fall night with a relatively open sky as well. My friend went into work while I read my book with nothing abnormal happening while I sat there. He came out a couple of hours later and we set off back to my place. We had been driving and talking further about various geeky topics until we began driving up this hill. We just seemed to have an awkward silence between us in the middle of our conversation, and I specifically remember thinking something was just off as we reached the crest of the hill. At the crest of the hill is a house on the passenger side of the road, with a mailbox and a guardrail which leads from the base of the hill up to the driveway because there's a crazy sort of ditch on the other side of the rail. As we're about 50 yards from the driveway, I saw it, standing there by the side of the road. I could see the brown legs, torso, and antlers. I specifically remember thinking that the deer looked absolutely huge, and in the back of my mind, thinking that I should find out who owned the property near there that would let me go hunting near the area. But as we reached the crest of the hill, I realized that this was not a white-tailed deer. This thing was standing on 2 legs with what would have been its front legs hanging at its sides, as a human would have their arms. The head was also wrong, as it just didn't seem to have a snout, and its face was covered by hide with its green glowing eyes facing toward us. Its antlers were sitting at the top of a sort of human-shaped skull almost. which is not where they sit on a deer's head. This thing, though, was absolutely massive, standing between 6.5 and 7 feet tall, and very broad, which I'm gauging off of the scale against my car as I drove by it in comparison to my size. I drove a 2008 Chevy Impala, and I'm 6 foot tall. My abdominals were aligned with the window when I was standing outside, and when we were right next to this thing, I saw its legs at knee level. I managed to keep driving onward without any issue, and my friend and I continued in silence for, well, nearly a mile when he finally turned to me and said, "Did you just..." He asked before I cut him off, saying, "Yeah." And as he brought it up, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. He continued, "You know, that could be a..." I cut him off again and said, "I really don't want to talk about it, okay?" We stopped talking about it and continued for the next 10 miles in silence till we reached my house. We went to bed, even though some of our friends were still up, but I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. It should be said that I grew up in this 4-county area, and I've been traveling these roads at all hours of the day and night my entire life, especially the one that we had taken, which I traveled at least twice a week at roughly the same time frame. I have extensive experience with Michigan wildlife, and have acted as the nighttime deer spotter for my family since I was old enough to see over the dash. I've hunted since I was 10 years old, and have killed many deer, and as is common in my area, I have been the victim of a car deer accident more than once in my life. If anyone thinks it was a person doing a prank, you could factor that percentage down to pretty much 0. It's near the end of bow hunting season at that time, and no one outside of the towns and cities would dare dress as a deer, much less by a road. I also discussed this with my friend before sharing this, and our descriptions of the events matched. We don't talk about this much, and we really don't see each other often at all anymore. Also, I was used to staying up till dawn, so it wasn't me being tired or anything. Weirdly though, why did it seem we had entered a sort of trance like that? I've seen blood spurting out of someone's open neck, and I've not missed a beat as I applied pressure waiting for an ambulance, so why did this bother me so much? What was it? A Wendigo, a skinwalker, not a deer, or something else? The questions still haunt me, along with the anxiety that I feel every time I walk into the woods. I haven't seen anything like this since then, and really, I hope that I never do. This happened over a decade ago. My ex and I decided to hitchhike across California because we were bored and homeless, and really we had nothing better to do. We stopped in a small town and found a little stream underneath a bridge. My feet were hurting really bad, so I took my shoes off to cool them in the water, and that's when I noticed movement in the bushes to my left. Then a strange man walked out, staring at me wide-eyed. He made a movement with his finger as if he wanted me to go into the bushes with him. I froze, and I yelled for my ex who was on the bridge waiting for me. He came running, but by the time that he got there, the man was gone. It was a really creepy experience, but I'm used to weird things happening to me because I look much younger than my actual age. I know he must have thought that I was a kid at that time, which that makes it even worse, I suppose. It's unnerving, though, to think that someone could be comfortable enough to do that in the daytime. And that is why these days I never go exploring by myself. I am a respiratory therapist that works at a local hospital. I was on my way to work, about less than a mile away from my occupation, when the car in front of me quickly merged into one of the emergency lanes, as if something sudden had just happened. Then he just sat there. No hazards going off, nothing to indicate that he'd planned on moving. I still had 20 minutes before I had to be at work, Assuming this individual may be in distress or have car problems, I decided to be a good Samaritan. I parked on the shoulder of the road and turned on my hazards. We exchanged eye contact and I gestured a wave, rolled down my window and asked, "Are you okay?" He seemed to have either not heard me or ignored me, but he did seem to realize that I wanted to help him. He gets out of his car at this point. Keep in mind we're on an extremely busy road. I'm also in my work scrubs, which tends to help people relax knowing that they are with a healthcare professional. However, this was different. When he got out of his vehicle, I assumed that he would have told me that he was in some type of pain or something that caused him to pull over abruptly. I mean, he'd been driving fine the entire time that I was behind him. So I casually get out of my vehicle and walk over to the back end of his car. And this is when I officially start a conversation, asking if he's hurt or if something is wrong. Just all the basics. But the thing is, his eyes were so cold. He had this body language to him that almost made him seem a little unhinged or skittish. He hadn't answered any of my questions, so I tried once more asking, "Hey man, we're in the middle of a busy road. Is there something wrong with your car or something going on with you?" He simply replied, "No." I started to feel this sensation of discomfort, like he wanted to do something to me but was restraining himself. So I just continued to play it off. He didn't seem drunk or high, but he had these black beady eyes that I just couldn't stop looking at. It was as if he was just a vessel to something dark. I tried to continue the conversation. "Well, why did you stop, man? You don't want to get hit out here, do you?" He replies, I don't know where to go." I didn't know what he meant by this, so I questioned further by saying, "Do you know what city you're in right now? If you're lost, I can tell you where the nearest highway is," which was also less than a mile away. His reply was a little chilling. "Anywhere but here." I was now really confused. He didn't know where he was, but he felt this urge to get out of the area as quick as possible. So I asked, "Well, what direction are you wanting to go? The 75 north will take you to Dayton. You could also take 75 south and you'll head to Cincinnati." He then asks, "What would you do in my position?" Now, I have no idea what he meant by this. I simply said, "Oh, I don't know what kind of position you're in, man. Can you drive? The hospital I work for is within view and we don't have to go in. I just want to make sure that you don't get hit." He agrees to follow me, but once I turned on my blinker to turn into the hospital, he completely stopped following me, pulled a U-turn and just sped off. Now, I know that this isn't like the creepiest thing in the world, but you really have to try to understand just how foreign and strange this guy's behavior was. Each time he engaged in conversation, it was as if he was contemplating to tell me something, but ultimately remained silent. From the looks of it, he drove a red Toyota, a RAV4 hybrid maybe. So, I mean, he didn't have a broken down car or looked like he was a substance abuser or anything. He just seemed incredibly nervous, and his fast motion gestures and twitches of all his body language has left me puzzled, and still gives me shudders when I think about how he moved, talked, and the lack of response, declining any help, not explaining a single reason as to why he just decided to park on the side of the road in the highway like that. I mean, a simple, "Oh, I'm lost," would have been enough for me to feel better about the entire situation. He just seemed incredibly paranoid and hesitant. On top of that, too, the entire conversation led nowhere to his situation or why he was acting so strange. I just wanted to make sure that he didn't need help or get hit by a car or something. Anyway, I'll update you guys if I hear anything about a patient coming in later. He also has a face that is burned into my memory now that I will not forget. I just got this gut feeling to leave, but to be as polite as possible, I guess. But what do you guys think? Do you have any thoughts as to what this all could have been about? And if you do, please do share them with me because I'm still lost. So, this started about 2 to 3 years back. I had just experienced a terrible breakup, and I started receiving these really disturbing phone calls. It started simple. The first call I answered, and the person on the other end said how much they missed me. Now, I have a very small circle of friends, and I'm not on Facebook or any social site where I update my photos or daily activities or anything. This is important too. And I know that the ex that I just split up with had nothing to do with the following as well. The first call, like I said, was simple. They said that they missed me. I asked who it was, and they said, "It's me, don't you remember?" So I just hung up, and they immediately called back. Crying and upset that I was being mean. The caller clearly was an adult male, but they were talking as though they were a very young child, around 6. I hung up again, and they didn't call back. Looking back, I should have blocked the number, but as I mentioned, I just got blindsided by a breakup and I wasn't thinking straight. Then they kept calling. They would call, and if I didn't answer, they left messages saying how pretty I looked with my blue sweater that day, or that they knew how I took my coffee now and said that they would remember it for when we finally went out for a drink together. At that, I blocked the numbers, but they would call from another. I answered one day, yelling at them to leave me alone, and hung up again. When they called back, it wasn't the boy this time, but his mother. She was very upset, saying that I was hurting her boy by not wanting to play, and you could very clearly hear the boy crying and screaming in the background. At this point, it dawned on me that this actually wasn't a joke, a prank, or something like this. There was something seriously wrong with these people, and they were obviously watching me. For a few weeks following my breakup, I had to live in my car. The entire time I hardly slept. I was terrified, thinking that I would wake up one day and see him standing outside of my windows. When I finally got a place, he called to congratulate me, and he couldn't wait to come and play with me. I haven't heard from the people for a year now, but I checked my phone after a very busy workday, and I noticed 10 missed calls, and to be honest, I'm terrified to check my voicemail. I've reached out to the cops, but they won't do anything since I haven't been explicitly threatened, and have been advised to just block calls. I'm going to change my number, but I'm terrified that the calls will continue even after that, and that it will upset them further. I'm sharing this because I'm hoping that people might have some kind of advice for me if I reach out to them, or tips or something, because right now, I honestly feel like I'm living in a horror movie. This happened when I was around the age of 11 to 13. I'm 20 now. So, growing up, we had it rough. Our family lived off of minimum wage, my dad was an alcoholic, my siblings were banned from our neighbors' houses because they were accused of stealing. One of our neighbors that lived right next to us was actually a teacher. I'll call him A. He was a teacher at our local high school. He lived with his wife, and we'll call her B, and his 2 kids. We were friends with his kids and occasionally spent afternoons at their house with our other friends. The husband, he had a brother that had mental problems caused by drug addiction. We'll call him C, and he lived just beside their house as well. It was like a duplex, but with C's door facing our fence and A and B's door facing the road. Now, there are times when we were watering down plants that C would come up to our fence and show his tongue at us, as if trying to lick the air in front of me while making eye contact. We don't usually hang out at our garden because of this, and if we had to go to A and B's house, Either had to come out and watch us go in so C wouldn't touch us, especially me because I was just really terrified of him. But still, this was our only house that we were welcome to, and we were dumb little kids and just wanted to play. Now one day I was coming home from school. As I unlocked our gate and went in, I saw C picking our doorknob with a flattened spoon. He ran when he saw me and climbed up the fence back to his house. And to say that I was mortified is a massive understatement. I told his brother about it, but they didn't do anything. We had to add wires to our fence so that he couldn't climb our fence again. Honestly, I just thought that he was a bit of a creep. I also thought that he was just struggling with his mental state and drugs and all that, but a few months passed by and my dad was away. By the way, I had 2 siblings, all of us are girls, so when my dad left for something, the only ones left in the house were all females. One night though, I heard a discreet sort of psst while I was filling our water containers. I ignored it, but then I heard it the second time and I looked around and saw that it was A calling me from the other side of our fence. He signaled that I should go outside because he's going to give me something. It was a 20 peso bill, rolled really tight. This was weird because when he handed me the bill, his other hand was inside of his shorts. It happened again after a few days, and this time he was wearing only a towel on his lower half and his hand is again inside the towel, clearly doing something under there because I can see his forearms moving. This time, I was really creeped out and went inside immediately. I never told my parents about this. I noticed he also started calling my other sister, and I told her to stop going when he calls, and she did. After that too, we never went to their house again. We transferred after that, but since I attended the high school he was teaching at, and some of my friends are his students, I still heard some pretty disturbing stories. He was apparently really into the female students, mostly sarcastic to males. Years after, he was discovered that, yeah, you can guess the rest. And I don't know what happened after that, but I still haven't told my parents my story, and I'm wondering if maybe I should. I live about a 10 to 15 minute walk away from the beach, and I made a point to walk to the beach more since it's been so hot lately. Anyway, I was with my sister and we had just come back from the beach. We passed this weird looking guy. He had scruffy hair and was wearing no shirt and giving a bit of a weird vibe. My dog, large German Shepherd, started going crazy though, barking and growling, and I had to get my sister to help hold my dog back from this guy. He said to me, "There's a big snake in the bush over there, you know," and pointed to it. I sort of nodded and we kept walking. He walked in the direction of the beach and we kept going on our way, but we started going a fair bit faster at this point because that guy was pretty creepy and we wanted to get out of there. We made it to this point where we have to wait a couple of minutes to cross the road because of cars, and that guy, I kid you not, comes out of the bushes, like emerges from nowhere. That means that he must have seen us, pretended to walk away, and then immediately cut through the bushes and started following us. We then started walking home and he kept following us, sticking a few meters to the left. I then said in a loud voice, "I think that weird guy's following us," and he immediately turns around, walks up to this path that he already passed and goes up it. We were pretty sure that he was still watching us and following us, so we made a plan to go a different direction, so as not to let him know where we live. We did circles for a bit, and then we went to our house and told our parents about what had happened. They were obviously pretty concerned about the whole thing, and we did circles for a bit, and when we were confident that he was gone, we then went to our house and told our parents about what had happened. I was sleeping in my dorm room and I was alone, and suddenly I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't move. I've had sleep paralysis a few times before, so I didn't really care too much, and I tried to fall back to sleep again. Also, I have my bed against the wall. After almost 20 or so seconds, I then started hearing footsteps which were coming from the other side of the wall. They were not normal footsteps though, they sounded like someone was jumping aggressively or walking in a very weird manner. I was still sort of paralyzed throughout the experience, but I tried to bang on the wall as I thought that the girl from the other room is doing it intentionally. So I tried moving my hand, but I failed. Then I could hear those footsteps in the front of my bed, in my feet's direction, and they were ascending towards my head side. I could hear loud breathing now, and at that, I started to get scared. I had another bed on my right side which was empty. I looked through the side of my eye and I could see the mattress which had dents on it, as if someone was standing on the bed, and suddenly I could feel that someone had just started jumping on that bed aggressively. I was absolutely terrified, and I was about to have a heart attack then and there, it felt, but slowly I got released from, well, the paralysis, I guess you could say, and I could still see those feet jumping on that bed though. I suddenly started chanting some mantras, and it then disappeared and the curtains moved. I checked the time and it was 3:45 in the morning. I sat there for a bit, rubbing my eyes and wondering if I had just seen what I had seen. I still get shivers when I share this. I'm a religious person and I didn't really believe in the paranormal, but I am 1,000% sure that there was something very bad and very negative there that day, jumping on that bed. I could sense the negativity around me for the entire time, and I have never felt this sort of negativity ever in my entire life. Long ago, on a pretty terrifying night, I had the most chilling experience that I have ever had. I was 15 years old, living in a small quiet town where everybody knew each other. It was a peaceful place, or so I thought at least, until that night. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in the care of my older sister, Emma. She was 16 and loved the idea of being in charge. That night, we decided to watch a movie, and halfway through there was a knock at the door. Emma paused the movie. We thought that it was just a neighbor or a friend perhaps, but when she opened the door, there was nobody there. We shrugged it off and went back to watch our movie. We weren't too bothered because we thought that it was just some of the other kids playing pranks or whatever. Later that night, I woke up to a weird tapping sound on my window. I must admit that I was a bit scared because of the dark, but I mustered up the courage to peek through the blinds. And there, in the dim moonlight, I saw someone or something in all black standing in our backyard just staring at the house. Upon seeing the figure, my heart began to race. I ran to Emma's room and I woke her up. When we both looked again, the figure was gone. The next day we told our parents about the incident, but they said that it was probably just a lost traveler or maybe a neighbor's guest or whatever. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something just wasn't right. The following night, the tapping, it returned, more persistent this time. It sounded like someone was intentionally trying to scare us at this point. I told Emma and she called our parents, but there was no answer. We were alone again and we were scared. Emma decided to call the police, but as soon as she picked up the phone, the tapping stopped. We felt relieved, but still a bit uneasy. We tried to sleep, but a sudden loud bang from downstairs jolted us both awake. Emma quickly grabbed a flashlight, and we tiptoed downstairs to see what the noise was. The living room was just a mess. Books from the shelves were thrown onto the floor, the couch cushions were scattered everywhere, and then we heard a whisper, a faint, eerie voice coming from the kitchen. It was singing a slow, sort of haunting tune. Emma signaled for us to sneak back upstairs, but as we turned, the kitchen light flicked on by itself. Upon seeing that, we bolted upstairs, locked ourselves in my room, and pushed my dresser against the door. We huddled together, listening as footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow and heavy. They stopped right outside of my room. The doorknob rattled gently, then more violently. We were trembling, holding each other tightly. The house then went silent for a moment. Then, a voice, soft and raspy, spoke from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there," it said. We did not dare to respond. Then the sound of footsteps receded. We stayed awake the whole night. We were scared to even breathe, to be honest. In the morning, our parents came back and found us asleep in my room, the dresser still blocking the door. We explained everything and they called the police. The officers found no sign of forced entry, but they did find footprints outside, beneath my window and around the house. After that incident, my parents installed security cameras and an alarm system. The police patrols in our area increased as well, but the scariest part was that they never really caught anyone. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear a faint tapping and I freeze, wondering if it's just my imagination or if whatever that was has returned. This was during the pandemic in San Francisco. The streets were a lot more bare than usual that day. I had recently moved to my new apartment in Nob Hill from the notorious Tenderloin district, which actually wasn't as terrible as it said, but I was still very happy to leave nevertheless. One night though, I was feeling a little bit nostalgic and missing the beer prices, so I wandered the street down to TL. I always wear headphones while walking, but this evening there was an inner voice that told me to turn them down and keep my eyes out. It was about 10 p.m. and I listened to that voice, but with little caution. I got down to my old hood, deep within the craziness where the only sign of the pandemic was masks on everybody's faces. I buy my 40 ounce of St. Ides and I head back up the steep hill to California Street to get home. Lo and behold, a few blocks out of the hood, I feel this dude behind me first. Even though the sidewalk is completely empty, I move to the side to let him pass, but guess what? He doesn't. I turn to see, well, his junk in his hand, trying to rub it all up on me. I scream at him and he scurries like a roach into the shadows. Mind you, the streets are getting real steep at this point. He's a bit chubby, so I'm like, let's book it up these hills. I get a few blocks up and like 30 floors later and no one is behind me. I breathe a sigh of relief and maybe I can just walk home now. When all of a sudden, like the Terminator, I swear, he appears from beneath the streetlight and starts coming after me faster than ever. I pick up my pace, feeling like I'm in the worst dream ever or some horror movie, but then realize that what I'm doing is the wrong move. So I stop. And I start screaming, but look around and there's not a soul. The streets were completely dead, and that really scared me. He started cornering me into this wall with his junk still out, and suddenly I remember to act like I saw a bear, like be big and yell, make them afraid of you. So I made myself as big as I could and crazy and pulled out my 40-ounce bottle and I said, "I'm going to kill you." I did end up with a few scratches and bruises, but it worked. That creep eventually ran off. Even still, I ran off scared as well, looking behind me every other moment, until I got to my favorite place, Ina Coolbrith Park, and I waited, shaking until I was sure that that psycho wasn't following me before I went home. Moral of the story, I suppose? Treat your aggressor like a bear, if you can. So this happened 7.5 years ago, June 23rd, 2016, while I was cleaning out my house. I was renting out a house for a year, and the year was almost up at this point. I wasn't going to be living there the next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space just for me. I lived there by myself, and I just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had moved on to clean the kitchen at this point. There were quite a few cabinets in this kitchen, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking through some of the ones that I didn't use to make sure that there was nothing that I had in them. One of them I opened up, and I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag or something. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think that it was mine. But when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could just barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sort of by the sink and halfway blocked by the stove. I honestly thought that it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little bit different to me, I suppose. I got inside and had to crawl inside the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw there was a small trapdoor to the side, leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, you had to be completely inside in order to see the detail of it, and I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got further inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food, as well as several blankets, as if someone had been living inside of there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was obviously gone. I tried to make sense of it and figure out how long the person had been there, and how I didn't know about it. I was gone from the house a lot with work, I suppose, and other stuff, but I just didn't know how it was possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. In any case, I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work, I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside, then I pulled the lever open just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement, and then saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door back shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car, and then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I opened up my phone and told the police the whole situation. They came to my house a short time later to find that whoever had been in there was now gone. I was absolutely disgusted knowing that this random person had access to my house for who knows how long. It felt like a vivid nightmare that I needed to wake up from. When I opened my phone to call the police, it showed the date was June 23rd, 2016, and I still remember this date, 7 years later. It stayed with me like a scar that I don't know if I will ever really heal from. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully it never gave me a problem. So about 5 years ago now, I lived in a flat. I'm from the UK, so a flat is basically an apartment. It was just me and my dad that lived there, and my dad has always been a workaholic, so he was away for weeks at a time. Weeks alone, which I'd have to fend for myself at 13. I didn't have any issue with this, to be honest, as I loved the independence, and I loved feeling like I had my own place as well. But I'll admit that I was a little bit lonely. I mean, I didn't have any friends at the time, my parents had just separated, and my mum didn't want much to do with either of us, so I never really saw her. Anyway, a couple of months after moving in, I was home alone. My dad had just gone away for work for whatever reasons, and he wouldn't be back until the weekend. Everything was going fine. There were no issues at all until I got tired and I went to bed that night. I wasn't deliriously tired or anything. I am an insomniac though, so sleep just sort of evades me most of the time. What I mean is that I'll feel tired until my head hits the pillow and then my brain comes to life and just will not shut off. But I shut all the lights off, got into bed, and I looked over at the foot of it. And when I did, that's when I noticed that something was stood there. It wasn't a person and there were no features. It was just some sort of, shadow, stood, not moving, at the end of my bed. I freaked out, obviously, and tried the whole thing of closing my eyes and opening them, etc. He disappeared when I opened them again, but I could still feel eyes on me. Naturally, I assumed that I was just paranoid about being home alone, even though I was completely used to it at this point, and never freaked out or worried about it before. So I put the light back on and I went to sleep. I tried not to think about it, went to school the next day, just got on with life, stuff like that. I mean, I've always had a strong imagination anyway, so it was probably all just in my head. But he was there the next night too, stood at the foot of my bed, looking at me. I could feel his eyes on me before I saw him. He had no face, just some sort of silhouette, but I could feel it. I don't know how else to describe the way it felt, but the way I knew something was there was weird, even if I wasn't looking at it at first. It was terrifying, but I felt comforted maybe, almost, by him being there. It didn't feel like this shadow wanted to kill me or whatever, more like he was watching over me perhaps. I don't know. It's weird and I've never been able to properly explain it. I've always brushed this off as just some kind of sleep paralysis, but I was never asleep when I saw him. I was never tired or unable to move, never fresh from a nap or something like that. I'd be fully conscious and he would just suddenly be there. Like I said, he wasn't threatening and I learned to live with it. Seeing him whenever the lights went out and I was home alone was always a bit of a fright, but I got used to it. But then, the second one appeared. The second one was smaller, and the only way that I can describe it is by saying that he reminded me vividly of the mum from Hereditary, when she's crouched on the ceiling. He stayed in my peripheral at all times as well, which was very unnerving, and he first started showing up in the bathroom. I'd be using the toilet and he would be there, waiting for me. He felt threatening, like he was ready to pounce at any given moment, and it panicked me so badly that I often refused to use the bathroom, wash myself or brush my teeth, because he was always in there, even when the light was on. The worst part though was that I could hear his feet against the ceiling as he sort of chased me whenever I ran out of the bathroom, like the sound of someone running after you, but his hands and feet were against the ceiling, so it was more like an animal chasing you. I was absolutely terrified of him, and I never got used to it. I lost a lot of sleep over that period of time and continued for about 6 months, until suddenly they just stopped. I didn't see either of the shadow things anymore, and to this day I've never been able to explain what the heck it was. I've spoken with counselors about it, and their only response is that it's some way of my brain coping with neglect or something like that. But I just cannot help but feel like it really wasn't purely my imagination. Who knows, maybe I am crazy, or maybe there is some sort of psychological reason behind it, but I will never be able to forget the sound of rapid footsteps behind me like that, or the feeling of eyes crawling all over me like 1,000 bugs as I slept. I've since stopped talking to friends about it because they think that I'm an undiagnosed schizophrenic or something. But there's something inside of me that just cannot accept my imagination, curating all of that. So, am I crazy? And if I'm not, well, what the heck were they?